to follow the story of this young man who lost his father and was betrayed by his ex-girlfriend and the people he considered his friends. In addition, the young man was thrown into the sea to become fish food, but 5 years later, he has returned to seek revenge, swearing that all those who made him suffer in the past would regret being born. The manhwa begins with a General Jong Baiken visiting his father's grave, and in his thoughts he was saying that he had fought for 5 years and was finally back. It doesn't take long before one of his soldiers comes to give his report about the investigation he had started. But since they hadn't found much, the general ordered him to keep searching, for now that he was back, he would do everything he could to get revenge against those who had killed his father. The soldier mentions that his wife from the Wang family left a message asking him to keep in touch with her, and that she would pick him up soon as well. At this point we see a part of his past, specifically just before his father died. Basically the surgery would cost on average 20 million, and if he didn't get the money soon he would probably pass away. He even tried to convince the doctor to do the surgery first, so that his father could get the money out of the account when he was well. But the doctor was completely arrogant with him, saying that if he didn't have the money he'd better borrow it. This was not a charity hospital. The only solution he thought of at the time was to try to contact his grandfather. But there his uncle prevented him from entering, saying that he would not lend him even a cent. Jiang began to speak some truths to his uncle, saying that it was his father who helped him when he was at rock bottom. But even so he refused to lend him any money, and said that it was better to bet on dog races than to lend him money. This caused our protagonist to go into a complete rage, saying that if he didn't lend him the money, he would never forgive him. On top of that, he also tried to get his uncle, making the scum afraid of him. But soon Jiang ended up being hit by the guards with a kind of stun gun, and was left on the ground without much to do. As he had nowhere else to turn, he decided to try to ask his girlfriend for money this time, and we get a scene of some kind of party going on. However, right at the entrance he was already being held by the security guards themselves. Here we see his girlfriend's rattlesnake enjoying herself with her new companion. When he finally managed to get in, the people around him started to humiliate him. As if this were not enough, his cousin even pushes him into the pool, and starts humiliating him in front of everyone as well. Instead of his girlfriend doing something to help, the anaconda just kept saying that he was useless. You could already tell that the humiliation he was going through here was enormous, but since he needed the money for his father's surgery very badly, unfortunately he had to put up with it. Jiang began to explain why he was there, and begged his girlfriend to help him get the money for his father's surgery, and she soon appeared asking him to shut up, saying that she would lend him the money, but on one condition: she liked his cousin, Yuan, so he was not to bother her anymore. At the moment he wasn't really believing what he had just heard, but she confirms it soon after, saying that he would be nothing if it weren't for his father. And she throws the card containing the money on the floor for him to take, since it wouldn't hurt to give the card in his hands. Here was the height of humiliation, and people were laughing so hard at our protagonist that if he became the Joker here, I confess I would think it was too good. But he still held back and decided to just take the money and leave the place. But apparently this would not be as simple as it seemed, since his cousin told him to get down on his knees and bark. The problem was not so much what his cousin had just asked, but what he would say next. When he told Jiang to get down on his knees like his father, he couldn't hold back any longer and punched the scum of society right in the face, throwing him away as if he were a simple piece of manure. He takes the opportunity to grab the card that contained the money for his father's surgery, and runs out, leaving the place of toxic people. Some time later he finally got in touch with the doctor, saying that he had gotten the money and had paid the operation fee, so he could finally operate on his father. But the doctor said he was about to let him know that his father had died. The shock was so great that he began to think that the doctor had actually given up the operation for fear that he would not get the money. To tell the truth, I don't doubt very much that this was the real reason either. But soon he was carried out of the hospital by security guards. But it is a fact that the pain he was feeling here didn't even fit in his chest. In General Jiang's memories, he only remembered that on the day of his father's funeral, it was raining heavily. and the henchmen of someone powerful were apparently beating the protagonist, saying that he was destined to die along with his father, and their leader ordered them to throw him into the sea so that he would become fish food. Meanwhile, the protagonist, now called the General, has returned triumphant after serving the army 5 years later. The General then asks his soldier to contact his wife, as he would soon be joining her. But the soldier mentions that since he was already the leader, he didn't need to be a normal husband of the Wang family, which was his wife's family. But he replies by saying that he did, because without the help of Uncle Wang, who married his daughter to him, he probably would have died, or something like that. So he needed a normal identity, because he would make all those people who didn't care about his relatives, selfish and greedy people, stand beneath his feet. At that moment we see a car speeding away, and the driver was asking Miss Zhu why she had to pick up Jiang alone. Not least because she had a business meeting with Manager Chen about an investment, and they could not delay in this. Since it was her father who had made this request, she couldn't refuse, and she just asked her assistant driver to speed up even more so that they could get there faster. When the assistant driver ended up saying some cruel things about our protagonist, she just remained silent without knowing how to respond to these offenses, since she was his wife. Right at the airport we see Jiang completely changed compared to when he lost his father. From his conversation on the phone we could already see that he was now a very important and influential person by the looks of it. Moreover, as he saved an important family 3 years ago, they told Jiang that if he needed anything, all he had to do was tell them. And we could also see that the girls around him kept staring at our protagonist, as our protagonist had his own plans. He tells the boy on the phone that he didn't have much need for this, but since he still needed an identity in that city in order to fit in there, he mentions that he would deliver the Rongdong Corporation to him. And seeing his wife's car nearby, he says that they would talk about it later. Here he had completely changed his real way of being, just so he could disguise it. And in the thoughts of the beautiful maiden, she said that he hadn't changed at all as a soldier in the last years. But that is only what she thought. The secretary then receives a call from Manager Chen, and soon she says that he passed her a message, telling her not to worry because he would pick her up at home. However, by the face of the beautiful maiden, you could already see that there was something wrong with this, even because they would be discussing business, so there was no need for him to come to her house. Already at the Wang family mansion, the manager was telling his aunt that he would soon earn 2 million with investments, so he could help them out of this current crisis. But apparently his interests were only in the divine Lady Zhu, and her mother said that she would make her divorce Jiang as soon as she returned, so that she could marry him. Fortunately, Miss Zhu eventually heard what her mother had recently said, and replied that they would only discuss company business. Thus it was not appropriate for Manager Chen to come to her home. The Dung then says that soon they would become family, so there was no need for all this. Furthermore, the old woman says that the Manager Chen said he would give her $1 million to save his company, which was currently going through a crisis. The protagonist did not let this comment go unnoticed, and decided to pay a little more attention to the conversation. The manager ends up asking the divine lady not to be so stubborn, since he knew about the crisis her company was going through recently. And even her mother ended up offending her boyfriend after hearing what the manure had just said. Jiang then says that he could get her the $1 million she needed, but soon the fat man ended up laughing at our protagonist. And her rattlesnake of a mother certainly made no effort to ignore what he said. Plus she had already prepared the divorce papers for her daughter to separate from him. Even with the protagonist saying that he had some friends who could help him with this, the cattle manure continued to cause the general's morale to go through the roof. On top of this, he boasts that he has invested in the biggest company in the area, which coincidentally was the very company that our protagonist would soon take control of. After this, the divine lady says that this was not as simple as he imagined, and asked her assistant to get him out of there first. When the scum of society approaches the divine lady, he would touch just where he shouldn't, but soon our protagonist appears taking the cattle dung's hand. Jiang says that they had not yet been properly introduced to each other, but his real intention was just to get the scum to stay away from his beautiful maiden, while the fat man said he would take his investment out of that family. Her mother pleaded with him not to do so, and we see that our protagonist was making a phone call in the background while all the confusion was going on. For the Dung to accept the protagonist's apology, he would have to get down on his knees and lick his shoes, and sign the divorce papers as well. But clearly Jong ended up rejecting the fat man's not-so-generous offer, saying he had to take a call. Soon the scum's cell phone rings, and he had to take that call. He ended up getting all excited thinking that he had attracted the attention of higher authorities, since it was an important secretary who had called him. The scum even threw the call he had received in our protagonist's face, saying that he would never get a connection like that. But as soon as he answers the phone, he finds out that the wrongdoing company, which he had been boasting about recently, would stop investing in his company. So at that moment they were cutting all still active business collaborations, without knowing what was happening. Only then did the fat man realize that he had done something he should never have done, which is precisely to have messed with a person and he shouldn't have. When the protagonist asks the manager Chen if his investment was successful, the scum was on his knees before Jiang, asking him to forgive him, since if they withdrew the investment over his company, he would practically be doomed. And here was just the Dung that had said it would lick Jiang's shoes. Even the rattlesnake of the Divine Maiden's mother eventually grew weak with such news she had just received. The beautiful maiden wondered if they had done something wrong, since even the manager was pleading with Jiang. But in response to the manager, the general only replied that he had no public relations and was not on the same level as him, as the manager had recently said. That being the case, he was better off scavenging on the street for the rest of his life. Besides, a person of his type was exactly like the guys who had humiliated him in the past. The manager, not knowing very well how to act after having got into such a complicated situation, thought that just apologizing would be enough for his mistakes to be forgiven. And after this he leaves immediately to try to redeem himself in some way. The rattlesnake of the Divine Lady's mother started asking what it was that our protagonist had done, but in the end he pretended, saying that he had done nothing. The girls then try to calm the old Gaga down, so that she doesn't have a nervous breakdown. And our protagonist was thankful that the company manager had not revealed his identity. After that, the Divine Lady began to get upset, as she had narrowly missed getting a partnership that could help her out of that current crisis. While the old woman from before kept insulting Jiang, he only said that he could help the beautiful maiden get a sum of 10 million. However, of course, the old stutterer from before couldn't believe anything he said. At a certain moment he suddenly felt a strong pain in his chest, and since he didn't want them to find out about this wound, he just said that he was a little tired. So, he needed to retire to get some rest, but he said that after a while of rest he would be back soon. The old woman from before was about to have a fit, and the Divine Lady was just trying to calm her down, saying that she would soon talk to him about the divorce. After this scene, we see our protagonist meditating in order to alleviate his pain. Thanks to this meditation technique, he managed to come back alive from the army. But it was still necessary to find 8 other pieces, and only then his internal wounds would be completely healed. Jiang received a call from his childhood friend, since he had recently found out that our protagonist had returned to the city. His friend's objective was actually to call him to the place where he was having a meeting, so that he could help him get a signature from Jiang, and only then would he get the support of a person they knew before. And in the end, our protagonist agreed to help him, saying that he would be there soon. At the place where the friend of the protagonist was, the young man was trying to convince the investor to make the signature soon, since soon Jiang would be there as well. In the end, however, he just wanted to wait for our protagonist to be able to do this. Speaking of him, it didn't take long before he arrived at the place. Apparently, this guy's goal was actually to humiliate Jiang, since apparently he must have had some fight with him in the past or something. The show started with some of his henchmen kicking a chair for our protagonist, but clearly he had already realized what their real intention was. The comments in that place about Jiang having served in the army were not the best, and let's just say they only made one comment after another worse. Even a girl who liked our protagonist in the past even mentioned something she shouldn't have, and still boasts that her boyfriend is Rongding's human resources manager. Meanwhile, Jiang just kept quiet, listening to everything that the snakes in that place said, but without being affected by it. But his friend couldn't stand to hear it any longer, and soon calls the protagonist to tell them to leave. He couldn't imagine that their intention was in fact only to humiliate him. The manure from before decided to play dirty, and started talking about his baby and the need he had to get that investment, even because his wife was about to leave him if he didn't get a decent job soon. The young man, not really knowing what to do, ends up giving in and asking him what he would like him to do. In response, the being that doesn't even deserve to be called an animal, because that would be an offense to animals, throws a bottle of champagne at him. He then asks them to kneel down and humiliate themselves before him. And it is already clear that our protagonist did not like this arrogant attitude of the young man. The boy, who had practically no reason to go on living, asks why he is doing all this. But the only thing the scum from before wanted was for them to kneel before him. Then he remembers what his wife had told him, and basically this dinner would be his last chance to get a job or an income really. Otherwise she would end up leaving and taking her children with her. Since he had nothing left to lose, he put his pride aside and decided to kneel before the scum in front of him. But Jong wouldn't let him do this, and said that since he was there for him, he didn't have to do it. After this, the being that shouldn't exist begins to humiliate our protagonist again. But this time the conversation turns out to be different than he expected, even because Jong took the champagne claw that he was holding and mercilessly broke it on the head of the guy from before. As if this were not enough, the protagonist ends up giving him a good kick, causing him to be thrown away as if he were nothing. The young man from before, who thought he was the most important person in the universe, started to boast about being one of the most respected people in town and working with the wrongdoing group. So he continued to threaten our protagonist. Little did he know, however, that Jong was actually a general in the army, and would not listen quietly to what he was saying. Jong then retorted, saying that even though he had some financial success in life, this did not give him the authority to humiliate those who had not achieved the same things he had. Moreover, the protagonist still reminds the scum of what happened 5 years ago, where he had made him go through a huge embarrassment in front of everyone. And now, 5 years later, the same embarrassment was repeating itself. On the way home, his friend praised him for having finally put the bully in his place, since he could no longer stand to see him causing trouble for various people. What's more, if it weren't for the investment he needed, he himself would have liked to have had the opportunity to do what the protagonist had done. When Jong asks about this investment he mentioned, the young man immediately tries to disguise it by telling them not to talk about it. He would not regret anything, even if the investment was lost. Moreover, that day was not a very good day for the young friend of the protagonist, which ended up being a relief for him to see the bully being humiliated. However, the young man, whose name I no longer remember, said he was afraid of what would happen when he went home. After all, he didn't even know how to face his wife and child, for fear of losing them forever. Jong then tries to comfort his friend, saying that he could help him right now to get a job. He then makes a call, probably to the manager of the company he owned, and needed her to do 2 things for him. The first being, he would like his classmate Liu Hu to have an investment contract signed by their company. And second, he needed her to take away any investment made in the bully's company from before. His friend, not knowing what was going on, ended up thinking that our protagonist had been drinking too much or had hit his head somewhere, because of the things he was talking about on the phone. Back to the bully from before, he vowed that he would get someone so that he could teach our protagonist a lesson. And sometime later he received a call from the president of the company he worked for, and received a personal scolding from the president, since they ended up losing an important contract with the wrongdoing company, all because of him. Only after hearing that he had offended the head of the company wrongdoing did he begin to wonder who he had recently offended, and only then did he realize that Jong was actually the president of the company he so boasted about having a partnership with. Back to our protagonist. He and his friend were getting ready to get a cab and go home, but soon the guy from before shows up and fills Jong's patience once again. But this time his intention was really just to apologize for the way he had acted recently, and by calling him the president of wrongdoing, the protagonist's friend ended up being completely impressed with him, and didn't know how he should treat him from now on. When Jong eventually showed that he would not accept his apology, the guy from before kept insisting. He even went as far as kneeling down to get Jiang's forgiveness. But in order to avoid this becoming something bigger and people there discovering his true identity, he accepted his apology. Thus, the manure from before would get his partnership with Jiang's company back again. But the protagonist asked him not to reveal his true identity to anyone. And finally, he bids them farewell, saying that he would leave them alone from now on. His friend, not knowing what to refer to now, tries to talk to him formally. But soon Jiang says that it was the same as always for his friend, regardless of his current position as president of Rongding. Already at the Divine Lady's house, she was thinking that soon the council meeting would take place, and wondered how she would explain what happened with the cattle manure earlier to her grandmother. Soon she received a message on her cell phone. More specifically, as I understood it, this message was from our protagonist's manager. The message said that they had agreed to make an investment in her company the next day. I am calling thanks to the manager's dung that she had gotten that investment. And with that, she ended up thinking that if she kept seeing our protagonist, she would end up getting into even more trouble. Speaking of the respectful Sigma, he soon shows up at the residence of the fair maiden. And finally she decides to take action, although this would certainly not be a well-considered move. She even tries to talk to him about the divorce, but he says he doesn't want to talk about it now. When she holds him, she mentions that she could give him a country house and $1 million as well, so that he could live well with the future wife he could get. However, it was our protagonist who grabbed her this time, asking why she was talking about a subject that was of no importance to him. Moreover, he remembered what happened 5 years ago as well, while he was running from the security guards with the money from his father's surgery. The only one who defended him was precisely the Divine Lady, who did not allow the security guards to continue chasing our protagonist. After this he apologizes for suddenly scaring her, but this is only because he would not agree to that divorce, and asked her not to mention it again. She would soon see that, in fact, marrying him was not time wasted. She then wonders if this is really the same man she knew in the past, but she soon thought that he had changed so much just because of the money. Little did she know that he was actually doing this out of love for her too. And with that she decided to concentrate on the meeting that would take place the next day. The next day, Jiang was completely relaxed about the meeting with the leader of the Wang family, who was the Divine Lady's grandmother. Even she was left wondering how it was that her grandmother had personally invited our protagonist to that meeting. One more Dun arrived next, named Wang Zhu, but soon we will forget his name again, and affectionate nicknames will be added to him, like all the other Dung. He got into the mood of humiliating our protagonist, and quickly began to humiliate him in front of everyone there. But clearly you could see that Jiang really didn't care much about what came from below in order to hit him. After seeing that the fortunate lady defended our protagonist, he decides to speak directly to her, and starts praising the beautiful appearance she possessed, besides the fact that her face was very delicate. But when he finally realizes that in fact our protagonist took her place some time ago, he ends up experiencing a huge embarrassment. This time even his companions started to mock the scum. And clearly he ended up getting even angrier at Jiang, but vowed that he would put him through twice as much embarrassment. A while later, the old woman who is currently the head of the Wang family, while the real leader was temporarily away, had finally arrived to be able to start that meeting. Jiang, out of respect, decided to personally greet the old stutterer, who asked him what he had been doing in the army for the past few years. Her purpose in inviting him there was only to get some information if he had risen in rank or something. But when he said that he had not reached a high rank, her expression changed immediately. But she still allowed him to participate in that meeting. After finally starting that meeting, she mentions that Rongding has announced a new project called Spring Lingerie. Therefore, the Wang family would send 2 of their brands in order to complete the bidding, and maybe get this partnership with Rongding. But since the Divine Lady's company was not doing very well, should that proposal go wrong, her company would be taken over by the cattle from before that we have just seen being humiliated in front of everyone. The beautiful maiden even tries to go against her grandmother's decision, since the company she owned had been created by her father alone, with pure sweat and labor. But the toxic old woman showed her true identity, of an experienced snake, and said that if she wanted to remove her from the presidency of that company, she would do it easily. That being so, it was good that the divine lady did not dare to go against her will. Since the pretty little lady didn't have many options here, she ended up accepting what the rattlesnake had said. But in her thoughts, she was indignant that she always preferred only the manure from before, only because he was a man. Speaking of him, once again he starts humiliating our protagonist in front of everyone. But while he was doing this, the respectful Sigma just let the dung have his little glory temporarily. Already who soon it would be time to announce to everyone that he was the current president of Wrongding. We continue with our protagonist going on a visit to his company, together with his friend. When they get there they end up meeting the rattlesnake girl from before, who wondered what they were doing there. Naja even asked if they were there to work as security guard, and Jiang's friend tried to joke with her as well. However, since he didn't have that much time left, he soon decided to leave. Still, the anaconda insisted in picking on our protagonist and his friend, saying that her boyfriend was the HR manager of that place. Therefore, she didn't even have to interview to get into that company. As if this were not enough, she even says that she didn't even have to go to work either. She just went to the company so that she could be present there and then go home. And she was paid tens of thousands for just doing that. Speaking of cattle, he soon shows up, and you could already tell by the look on our protagonist's face that he was excited to be able to fire both of them when the time was right. As soon as he gets closer, the cattle mention that the new president would be taking over the company that day, and she decides to introduce the special colleague she had mentioned earlier to her manure. The hairless one ended up thinking that they were there for an interview or something, but soon a beautiful lady of superior position in that company arrived in order to welcome Jiang as the new president. When the two of them saw that all the employees there revered our protagonist, they ended up not knowing where to hide their faces after this. As Jiang discovered the trickery that the two had been up to recently, he fired them both at that very moment, and they were carried outside begging for a second chance. But now it was too late. In the president's office, the beautiful lady from before hands over the contract that the company made with his friend, as he had requested earlier. In addition, she mentions two other strong companies to be responsible for the project they would soon launch. Among these two companies was an unknown one, and the Wang family, which belonged to the protagonist's wife. It doesn't take long before we see several important people gathered for the possible partnership with the Wrongding group. Looking now at the divine lady, she was worried about what she would do if she couldn't win that partnership with them, not least because the future of her company depended exclusively on this partnership. The scum of society from before arrived next, provoking the beautiful young lady again. Since he didn't have many things to do in life, he found a way to torment the lives of the quiet ones. The cattle manure even had the nerve to say that she was there so that he could just show off his charm and try to convince the new company president Wrongding. As the divine lady just despised this kind of attitude of the being that doesn't even deserve to be called an animal, she just decided to keep quiet. The secretary of Wrongding's chairman, named Zhang Miao, arrives next so that she can welcome the guests. While she was doing the reception, she notices that the manure from before has aroused her interest, and she announces that the results of the partnership had already come out. Soon she asks where the Wang group was, and we see the beautiful lady and the cattle from before excited that they have been selected. However, only the head of the Wang group, who was the cattle manure, was asked to stay on site. As such, all the rest had been cleared to leave. The divine lady asks why she did not announce the result in public, thinking that it was not fair to the others since they had prepared for so long to hear the results. However, the charming secretary says that justice has always been for the strong, and the weak cannot talk about what was fair or not. As if that wasn't enough, she even says that that place was owned by the Wrongding group. Therefore, whatever they said was the rule would become the rule. After this conversation, the divine lady ended up running out of answers to what the charming secretary had said. In the meeting room, she was using her charm to be able to convince the strange being to sign the partnership papers. The guy turned out to be such cattle here that he signed the papers without even looking at what was actually on the documentation. As soon as he hands the papers to the beautiful secretary, he decides to ask her out sometime. but his invitation is quickly declined. In the Supreme Rattlesnake's house, they were celebrating the partnership with Wrong Ding, and also the fact that the Divine Lady's company would now be turned over to cattle dung. The scum of society were thinking too highly of themselves for having achieved this feat. And meanwhile, the Divine Lady was lost in her thoughts, since she would now lose everything she had built together with her father. In addition, she also felt guilty that all this had happened and apologized to her father. When Queen Naja takes a closer look at the clauses in the partnership contract, she realizes that something was not quite right there. From what I understand here, the Divine Lady's company was actually chosen to be able to organize the whole process, while the cattle would be left out of this. So we see that our protagonist was just enjoying a good drink in the company of his beautiful secretary. The old Gaga was disgusted by this and asked what kind of joke this was, and only then did the dung realize that he had actually been fooled all this time. When Wang Zhu decides to look at what was in that contract, his eyes ended up filling with tears, thus celebrating that she had finally gotten something of value. In her thoughts, she thought about why they had cheated the cattle from before, since from the beginning they had chosen her, even thinking that possibly the president had some grudge against her cousin. Since the old woman would not accept this quietly, she soon shows her claws again. Basically, she was saying that Wang Zhu would actually be the vice president of the Wang family. Excited by this news, she ended up not suspecting what her grandmother was up to, thinking that she would now be a powerful person, since she would be the second in the family leadership. But this soon changed when the old lady of dung ended up saying that her company would be passed on to cattle, so that she could focus on the vice presidency part. Not believing what she had just heard, the Divine Lady ended up contesting her grandmother's decision. She was the one who had done everything to win that bet, and it wasn't fair that she should give it up now. Only now does the beautiful young lady realize her grandmother's frame up to get her favorite to take over the business. The old Sukiri even uses the excuse that because Wang Zhu is a woman, she would have to pause the business in order to take care of her children. That being the case, it was better that her cousin take over all the businesses from now on. However, she was still against this, further saying that her grandmother didn't even really have the Wang surname in the family, and that she was also a woman. Unfortunately for the beautiful little lady, she ended up getting slapped in the face because of what she had just said. Next, the old Gaga says that when she got married, she defended the family's statuses and joined the Wang family, even though she was not part of it before. Moreover, she humiliated our divine miss, saying that she was nothing but a disposable girl. Still, since the Supreme Rattlesnake didn't really have the Wang surname, she couldn't even be in charge of the family estate. Not to mention that Mrs. Company started only with her and her father, so she couldn't let her family's work be ruined by a third party. Started pretending to be the poor thing in front of everyone, pretending to be an innocent angel. There was so much theater that, besides doing what she did before, she even pretended to be having a faint just to make the Divine Lady give up the company in front of everyone. The snake cub ended up telling Wang Zhu that if anything happened to his grandmother, he would never forgive her. Chaos. Unfortunately, the beautiful young lady ended up attracting attention and unwanted comments on her person, thus causing her to give in and let the slags have her company. As she walked away, she thought to herself that from the beginning this was predestined to happen to her, since it was all just a setup by her own fake grandmother on her. From the rattlesnake's face here and the toothless old woman's smile, you can already tell that I never doubted it from the beginning. In the Wang family home, the Divine Lady was crestfallen about everything that had happened yet. Even though it had been a few days since she was forced to give up her company, she still hadn't gotten over her shock. A while later she ended up receiving a call from the cattle president, or President Chen. Since he had heard what had happened to her recently, he called her and offered her a proposition. Therefore, he would like her to come to his location so that they could talk more about it. Not least because he had secured a new partnership that could greatly help her to build a new independent business. As the value of the investment was very high, more precisely in the amount of 10 million, she ended up hesitating whether to accept it. But she didn't stop being suspicious either, because it was already late at night, and even so, he asked her to leave the house at this time. But the Cattle King said that some opportunities come only once in a lifetime, so she should take advantage of them. After hearing this, she eventually agreed to meet with Dung and asked him to wait for her. Jiang, seeing that she was possibly going precisely to the place where danger dwelled, decided to go with her to make sure she was safe. Even though he was going along, he still didn't believe that she would be foolish enough to fall for the manager's talk from before, even more so after seeing his true personality. During their dinner, they both started to fawn over the Divine Lady in an attempt to get whatever they wanted to do. However, to their chagrin, Jiang was only watching from a distance to prevent anything bad from happening to his wife. As the beautiful young lady is not at all easy to fool, she soon realized that something was wrong. This is because at present, she didn't even have the company with her and had practically nothing left. But they were still eager to make a contract with her. When the manure from before tries to get her to sign the contract first, he ends up dropping some kind of pill in her drink. Clearly, if she took this, she would be an easy target in their hands. After that, she decided to look into the terms of the contract and things like that, while the two of them were eager to be able to toast soon. When Jiang thought that she would drink that baptized drink, he decided to prepare himself for the worst. But to his surprise, the Divine Lady noticed all that theater and knew that her drink had been baptized, thus throwing the drink that was meant for her on top of the two dregs of society. Since this was a poison that took effect quickly, one of them has already started to put out what he had eaten for dinner. She then tells them to stay away from her and get out of her face. Furthermore, she also says that if they try to do anything like that again, she would call the police. But that she decided to leave, while the two of them were putting everything out because of the baptized drink. When our protagonist saw this scene, he thought she was more than worthy to be his wife. While the dung heaps were thinking of a way to get revenge on her in the future, they decided to go and enjoy the evening. But upon hearing this, Jiang said that he would take them to a place where they could have some fun, taking them to a sort of manhole in the middle of the street. In the midst of the rain, we see the beautiful little lady lost in her thoughts, as she had lost her position, and it was now difficult for her to take over the company again and move on. Not to mention that the old Gaga still prefers sons to daughters, and since her father was recuperating abroad, her mother only knew how to complain about everything. Suddenly, making her safe from the rain, our protagonist appears, who said kindly that he had come to her to take her home. As they walked home, she thought that maybe because she was lonely lately, she felt that she liked him at least being there for her. Soon she mentions that since she had nothing left now, she could no longer protect him, so it was best that he look for a job. But our respected Sigma tells her not to worry about it, even because he had some things he was preparing, although he could not reveal anything at the moment to her. And he even tells the Divine Lady that her cousin would not be able to take care of anything in her company either. When they arrive home, her mother and the Queen of the Rattlesnakes are waiting for them. Mercilessly, the old woman ends up slapping the Divine Lady in the face again. It accused the fair maiden, saying that she had sent some people to arrest her beloved grandson, as well as saying several offensive things to the young lady as well. When the Divine Lady replies that she was not responsible for what had happened, she was going to get another free slap. However, our protagonist shows up this time, preventing the old woman from touching his wife. Furthermore, Jiang says that if she has a problem, she was supposed to speak up and not use violence. Well, he had contact with the protagonist that the grandson of this rattlesnake queen had lost a lot of money in one of her casinos. After this, the old woman still insisted on beating her granddaughter, saying that he had no authority whatsoever to get involved in the Wang family business, so he had better get out of the way. Not even the god of heaven could touch his wife. With this, he made the old woman from before lock up some areas to the point that not even wind could pass through. In addition, he also managed to obtain even greater admiration from his wife. Since there was no evidence of kidnapping, it was enough for her to go and confront the kidnappers. However, if it wasn't Miss Sue's fault, the old woman had better get ready to apologize to her. At that moment, in the casino mentioned earlier, we see the cattle manure tied up by the security guards of the place. While the old woman was trying to save her favorite grandchild, she asked the beautiful lady to ask them to release her cousin. As they took a long time, the security guards figured they had taken 300 million to be able to do the boy's release. When she heard that huge amount, she wondered if they hadn't been hired by Miss Zhu to do the kidnapping. Then, it was Jiang's turn to take charge of the situation, making the old woman come to her senses. After all, this was a casino. Not to mention that a close friend of our protagonist said that he lost everything and more gambling there. And that is why he ended up being detained by the security guards. Even so, the poisoned anaconda refused to believe this story, saying that her grandson was not that kind of person. And speaking of the cattle, he said that those guys were hired by Miss Sue, asking him to give them 300 million as ransom. However, upon hearing this, the owner of the casino appears, saying that if there was someone capable of hiring him for ransom, he would like to meet that person. This big shot is none other than He Fasheng, the richest man in Yunhai. Upon seeing the protagonist, the old man recognized him and was about to reveal his true identity. However, Jiang asked him to be silent about it, and finally he disguises himself, mentioning what the grandson of the rattlesnake had just said about having hired him to kidnap him. As old he ended up finding what they had just said an offense. He ended up getting stressed out by the slags in front of him. As the old woman didn't know where else to put her face, she tried to apologize, saying that it had all been a mistake. Because if she had just the old man he is an enemy, their company would certainly be bankrupt in a short time. Considering that this was some kind of mistake, as she said, this should be properly explained, since he didn't want any of this to be thrown at him. When the anaconda heard what old he said, she started beating her grandson this time. To be honest, it's past time for her to do that. After being beaten badly, the manure from before finally assumed that he bet 300 million and lost, causing the casino security guards to hold him there until someone went to pay his debt. Since he was afraid that no one would come to his rescue, he decided to blame Miss Sue, saying that it was she who had hired someone to kidnap him. After hearing the scum story, the old woman slaps him across the face, calling him an imbecile for betting so much money in the casino. The old woman then, seeing the old man, he thought she could fool him by pretending to be poor, and here began her theater. She said that she had had a very hard life, and since her husband died young, she had no one to support her and her children. But she would love to have someone reliable like the elder he to spend the rest of her life with. When she did, the girls who were the old man he's companions show up, telling her some truths. If I can, he tells her to start thinking about how she is going to pay off her debt to him, not least because he would never trade filet mignon and picanha just for a piece of old meat. Since she had no way to pay the 300 million they owed, she began to beg for his mercy. He had already foreseen that they would not be able to pay this debt, so he had prepared a solution beforehand. When he hands her the envelope, she realizes that he demanded that she sell her company. However, since her companies would still not be enough, she would also need to transfer all the properties to his name. Not to mention that she would also need to hand over her grandson, since they would put him in the entertainment world. While the cattle from before were being carried off by security guards to pay for their mistakes, he begged his grandmother. Following this whole scene, the old woman proved to be the worst kind of person in the world, telling him to take her granddaughter because she was much prettier than her grandson. Even though she saw all the mistakes her grandson had made, she still defended him even though he was wrong. The divine lady was outraged at what her grandmother was saying to old he, and couldn't believe that she would be able to defend her cousin, even though he was the one to blame for ruining their company. The rattlesnake queen began to beg even on her knees, begging him to let the Wang family go and for him to release her grandson. Miss Zhu asks how she would have the courage to say things like the one she said recently, and also wondered if she didn't mean anything to her. The heartless old woman merely told the divine lady to shut up. To her, the beautiful lady was just a waste of money. When the elder he heard what the old woman had just said about his granddaughter, he realized that she was just the kind of person he hated the most. That is, those who thought that women were inferior beings to men. So he ordered the cattle to stop hiding behind his grandmother, and said that if she didn't sign that contract now, her grandson would not survive to tell the tale, not least because he would end up losing a member who was completely precious to him. I hope you were able to understand what I am referring to. When the Dung begged his grandmother to sign it, so that nothing would happen to him, she finally agreed to sign it. But as the old rattlesnake signed, she thought that all the family's possessions and all their property had been lost because of the previous accident, thus causing the old woman to have some sort of delirium and faint right there and then. The upset was so bad that the news even made it into the newspaper, saying that after the grandson of the family had bankrupted the company, the old woman had collapsed and was bedridden for the rest of her days. Old Jung thanked him for having helped him recover everything that rightfully belonged to the Divine Lady. In addition, the Rongding group had helped our protagonist a lot in the day-to-day life. But he ended up saying that he was too kind, because if it wasn't for him his family would probably have been destroyed, or something like that. Then the old man hands over the documentation of the Wang family's possessions, which they had taken that day. This way he could do whatever he wanted with them. But the protagonist says that he doesn't need to get involved with this now, and since they belong to his wife, he asks him to give them to her when the time is right. When Jiang was getting up to leave, he started to feel that pain from earlier in his chest again, causing the elder to be worried about him, since he hadn't seen it yet. The protagonist even tries to calm the elder, saying that it was just an old wound affecting the Kai and blood in the body. During his mission in the army he ended up suffering this fatal wound, but thanks to a technique he managed to survive. But since the wound was not yet completely healed, we see that if he had the Xuan King fragments he could be completely healed. The old man even asks if he would like to be introduced to some well-known doctor, but he says that this was useless. Despite all this, he tells the old man that he could only be cured if he got the fragments I mentioned earlier. After hearing this, the elder he said that even if he had to spend his entire fortune, he would find the Xuan King fragments for him. Suddenly the protagonist noticed the presence of a necklace there, which could possibly be the key to finding the other parts of the fragments. Making the excuse that he had some business to take care of at home, he said goodbye to Old He, and in his thoughts he discovered that the necklace possessed Xuan King's aura, and if he could find out where the necklace had come from, he would probably find the remaining fragments. However, when he arrived home to tell his wife what he had just discovered, she and her mother were crying on the sofa, not knowing what they would do now. Since Jiang didn't know what had happened, he asks what was going on and why they were crying so much. Soon her mother replies that they had lost the family fortune and now she would lose her husband. The Divine Lady replies by saying that they had just received the news from the hospital, saying that her father was terminally ill, and he didn't have much time, so she didn't know what else to do. Even our protagonist was not believing what he had just heard from his precious companion, and began to remember his past with the beautiful maiden's father. He had been the one who had never turned his back on Jiang. When the protagonist was in need of the money, Old Wang said that he already knew what had happened to his father, so if he needed any money, he could just stop by his house and pick it up with his daughter. In addition, Old Man Wang always thought of Jiang as his son, and in the past he wanted the protagonist to marry his daughter when he grew up. While they were on their way to the hospital where the Divine Lady's father was, she received a call from the hospital itself searching for Mr. Wang's relatives. A while later they finally arrived at the place, and a prestigious doctor named King Rong asked the protagonist to wait outside. From what I understood, this girl was the Divine Lady's father's niece and was therefore her cousin. Miss Zhu mentions that on the phone, her father said he wanted to see our protagonist and asked why she was preventing him from entering. The girl replies that it was Jiang's fault that the old man's condition had worsened, and that she shouldn't even have let the protagonist set foot in that hospital. According to the other doctors, thanks to her needle technique, Old Man Wang was no longer at risk of life. But soon the protagonist decides to fight back, saying that for him, she was nothing more than a person who talked too much, complaining about things he was not able to understand, besides being carried away only by his feelings at that moment. Since she was such a professional, she should put her personal feelings aside, and get out of Jiang's way since he was going in to see Old Wang. After this show, our protagonist finally managed to get past the doctor and prepared to enter the room where his father of creation was. Already inside he was holding Old Man Wang's hand, saying that he had come to see him. When his father finally managed to look at his son who had come to visit him, the protagonist realized that everything they had said about his state of health was a lie. and clearly he was about to go from this to a better one. So he asked for some acupuncture needles so that he could help him. But since all the doctors there were the lady's minions from before, they refused to do this, and of course said some bad things about our protagonist as well. The divine lady says that he is not a doctor and only asks him to trust the renowned doctor. But the conversation changes when one of the cattle says that the patient's pulse was dropping rapidly. Since old Wang was about to go from that to a better one in a short time, Jiang had no choice but to take charge of the situation and went after the acupuncture needles himself. Since the Xuan King technique didn't cure old Wang's problem, he would have to transmit his power through those needles. So if everything went well, he could revitalize the old man's body and increase his lifespan. After this, he finally stuck one of the needles in the acupuncture point. But unfortunately it was too late, and the old man went from this to a better one at that very instant. Or at least this is what the local people believed, including the doctor from before who called herself a highly renowned doctor. But still, for our protagonist this would not be the end, and he refused to give up the life of his father of creation. His willpower was such that he ended up summoning a golden dragon, saying that in the past he had been unable to save his father because he was weak. But now he refused to allow this to happen again, so he would not let someone he loves die. After trial, he finally managed to recover old Wang's health situation, thus bringing him back from the world of the dead to life once again. After such a great feat, the doctor from before wondered how he could have done something like that. We continue with our protagonist thinking of a way out of that recent situation, for having saved his Uncle Wang. He tries to explain to the people there that this was just something he learned in the army, calling this skill a secret first aid art. As the renowned doctor from before was curious, she asked from which tribe and in which country he learned it, but he used the excuse that he had promised not to reveal the secret of this art to anyone, so he could not reveal any more details about it. However, the doctor's cattle did not like his selfish attitude very much. Afterwards, Jiang says that they shouldn't be acting like children, since his uncle had just come back to life. He also says that they should focus first on the patient's health. Of course, they ended up being completely disgusted with our protagonist upon hearing what they had to do. The doctor from before just says that he was right, and they really should be taking care of the patient and not acting like that. Before leaving, she tells Jiang that he was not the loser that the rumors she had heard were saying. But still, she suspected that our protagonist was hiding something. That being the case, she would not rest until she revealed every one of his secrets. Once alone with his uncle and his wife, he asks the divine lady if she was alright. To his surprise, the deity herself hugs the protagonist, leaving him speechless at first. The beautiful lady ends up thanking him for his recent achievements, since thanks to him, her father still remains alive. To comfort her, he says that this was the least he could do, since he was her husband. Besides, the bottom line was that his uncle was fine now, and she should take her mother to rest. Not least because the old woman almost went along with the old man when he left that world momentarily. That being the case, he would take care of her father, so she didn't have to worry about things at the hospital. Soon after this, the divine lady ends up calling our protagonist my dear husband. This left him completely surprised by what she said, and he asked her to repeat it. But the divine princess ended up being embarrassed by her words, and tried to disguise it by saying that he had heard things. So she would be going home early, and meet him later. While he was alone, he remembered what she had said, and couldn't get the beautiful maiden out of his mind. Not to mention the beautiful voice she possessed, although we couldn't hear any of it. After a while, finally his uncle awakes from his deep sleep, and he asks how he was feeling at that moment. And apparently everything was fine for now. According to him, strangely he wasn't sure why, but he felt strangely refreshed after that night's sleep. But he did not dismiss the comment, thinking that he would pass away a few moments ago. Following this, the uncle asks where his daughter and his wife were, and the protagonist replies that the old woman almost had a heart attack. His daughter took her home. The uncle ends up saying that he had something to talk to Jiang alone, so it was good that they really weren't around. Following this, he reveals that his health had deteriorated a lot in the last years that he had been away serving in the army. In addition, he had done everything to make his wife and daughter well, in case something happened to him as well. However, there was still something that bothered him deeply, and he asked Jiang if he still hadn't gotten over the death of his father, and if he was still looking for the person responsible for it. Before the protagonist could answer, Uncle Wang himself had already said that he would not stop him. Adult and did whatever he wanted. However, his father had always been in good health and never had bad habits, and yet suddenly he simply had an illness and passed away suddenly. The people who took care of him said it was a coincidence, but he did not believe them at any time. During the years he had been away, he had not been able to find out who was the real culprit in all of this. However, he had gotten some clues, revealing that according to the investigation he had done, the failure of his father's project was caused because of the protagonist's older uncle. Upon finding this out, of course anger was taking over Jiang. But he continued to listen to what his uncle had to say, continuing to reveal everything he knew. He said that the elder uncle sold information about his father's project, which caused him to end up completely ruining the success of the project his father had been working on. In addition, together with members of the Jiang family, he planned the expulsion of the protagonist and his father from the family. In case you don't remember who the older uncle is, it is this scumbag that is being shown at this very moment who denied the money to save the MC's father in the beginning of the anime. Our protagonist's anger eventually took hold of him, and he swore that his uncle would pay for everything he had put his father through. Back at the house of the Supreme Cattle Manure, he was having a nightmare about his dead brother, and woke up scared, since he had been dreaming about it for quite some time. He thought that he was having these kinds of nightmares because the family business had not been doing very well recently, and he thought that this was his son's fault, that he was fooling around and not doing what was really supposed to be done. Soon the scum of society is calling for his son, in the most affectionate way possible. Then speaking of the insect, he shows up asking what happened. His father ends up giving him a scolding for disappearing for days and not giving any news. The insect then began to say that he was preparing some things for Uncle Wang, who had just been saved by our protagonist. So, he was preparing a scenario for when they go to their residence, to do the treatment of the Divine Lady's father. Upon hearing this, his father ended up fighting with him again, since he couldn't even take care of the family business, and he was worrying about the health of others. Not to mention that the Supreme Nun had told his insect son to get the signature of an important family to assist in their project, but he hadn't gotten any of this yet. Afterwards, the insect apprentice says that he already had the signature, but was just waiting for Ziking's father to arrive in that town. The insect still tells his father that the son of the Liao family had his eye on our Divine Lady, and soon they would be there looking for a way to save Uncle Wang, and he explained his plan to his father in more detail. Following this, the being that ends up polluting the air just by existing, eventually agreed to go along with the plan of the cattle manure, who was his son. Shortly thereafter, the Divine Maiden appears with her mother and her husband, searching for a way to improve her father's treatment. At that moment, our protagonist vowed that he would get back everything that was taken from him. As the beautiful young lady's mother spoke, we discovered that Ziking was indeed the protagonist's ex. But since she had married, she had ignored all the family business. And apparently the old woman thought that her daughter could now be trusted, just when they needed her most. According to her penny-worthy daughter, she said that they were going to take her husband to an immunotherapy center for the treatment of the Divine Lady's father's disease. However, as soon as they rang the bell, no one came to greet them. As the old lady had made it clear when they would be arriving there, she thought it strange that no one had come to greet them yet. When the beautiful lady tries to contact her sister via telephone, she realizes that her cell phone is also turned off. Thus, our protagonist decided to take charge of the situation, saying that his aunt had not rung the bell the right way, so it was better to let him try. Here was the climax of the scene, where Jiang ended up opening the gate in the best possible way, with just one kick. This left the Divine Lady and her mother completely without reaction, not knowing how to act at this moment. The worst of it all was that his theory was actually right, and quickly the guards came to receive them. The divine maiden ended up apologizing for what happened, since they didn't want to cause any trouble, and quickly introduced herself saying that she was there to see her sister. When the guards called the protagonist's sex a young lady, he couldn't help but laugh. Moreover, he even offended her by thinking she was some feudal aristocrat or something. To smooth things over, the beautiful lady tried to explain that he was her husband and they had gone together. Speaking of the cattle dung and the scum of society, they both appeared together wanting to know what was going on. But as soon as the poisoned rattlesnake spots the protagonist, she wonders what he was doing there. She then orders the guards to send him outside, leaving only his mother and sister to enter the residence. Upon hearing what the Sukiri had said, they ended up surrounding our protagonist in order to expel him from the residence. However, once again the angel of our lives appeared to protect Jiang, asking if his sister had called them there so that she could treat them only as disposable beings. According to the guards, they just wanted to teach the protagonist a lesson, but if she stayed in front of them, she wasn't supposed to complain in case something ended up happening to her too. Speaking of Sigma, he soon took the scene again, telling his wife to stay behind him so that she would be safer. Jiang ended up saying that her sister's puppies were not properly trained, since they didn't stop barking all the time. So it was obvious that he needed to play the role of big brother and take care of the animals, deciding to take on this responsibility for the time being. I just think that the protagonist ended up offending the poor animals, since those people didn't even deserve to be called that. By the way, they started barking again, boasting about his abilities and claiming that they would not allow him to touch the dung they had before. But it didn't take long for our protagonist to make them swallow their own teeth, and this one has apparently been trained in the right way. The other security guards then, on the orders of the human scum, went after Jiang again, but he taught each of them how to make a plane out of how many lagoons. He even taught them how to juggle, but apparently they didn't learn very well and ended up falling a few times to kiss the ground. After finishing off the dogs protecting the gates of Tartarus, it is his turn to finish off his brother-in-law and his ex. When he asks them if they were prepared to meet the spirit world, they ended up with some locked areas. But Naja from before started barking too much, saying that he was not crazy to touch a single hair on their heads, since they would call the police, and with the dung connections, he would get Jiang arrested for sure. When he heard what they just barked, excited to see it happen, and encouraged both of them to actually call the police. This made the rattlesnake even angrier, and the cattle decided to actually call the police. The divine lady ended up asking him to just apologize, since if the police were there, they would not be able to explain the situation to the policemen. But according to him, everything was under control, and she didn't need to worry. It didn't take long for the Cattle Supreme to get in touch with the police, and according to them, they would be there in about 5 minutes. The treacherous jellyfish started to boast, thinking that the end of our protagonist was near and he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But he replies by saying that 5 minutes was enough to make them turn inside out and never have wished to be born one day. Not to mention that normally, it has never been recorded in the history of mankind that a dead man speaks. This ended up making the anaconda start to tremble, thinking about what he had just said. But she still said that he would be in trouble if he did that. But he replied that the only way he would really be in trouble would be if he were in the shoes of the two of them at that very moment. The cattle then, to protect his wife, said that he was not the only one who knew martial arts, and now he was a black belt in Taekwondo. Initially our protagonist just dodged the cattle attacks on purpose, and when he spotted the police car nearby, he made quite a scene by falling to the ground. Soon after this, it seemed that both of them foresaw what would happen next. The beautiful policewoman ended up saying that if the cattle moved one more finger, he would be arrested. And the protagonist started acting in the perfect way, saying that those cattle were trying to beat him until he blacked out. The unresponsive cattle manure was surprised since he hadn't even touched him, showing us that he isn't even really worthy of facing Jiang. But before he could say anything more, she told him to shut up and that he was under arrest. While the insect was being taken to jail, he swore that he had been wrongly accused. As the Dung's wife was also revolted and even offended the authorities there, the beautiful policewoman says that she would keep her husband company since she liked him so much. On the other side of the screen, we see our protagonist being taken away on a stretcher, but you could already tell by his face that he was enjoying the whole show. At the hospital, he received a card from the beautiful policewoman from before, and we found out that her name was Lin Zio Ran. In his thoughts, he couldn't imagine that she was a policewoman being so young. and on top of that having the rank of Deputy Director of Officers in one of his memories, and he remembered the moment when she handed over her contact to him, saying that she couldn't stand to see someone taking advantage of the weak. And if they did anything else, all the protagonist had to do was call her. Since his intention was only to use his wounds to arm the cattle, he did not expect to be treated as a helpless puppy by the policewoman, thinking that he even deserved an Oscar because of his performance. But this calm didn't last long, as he noticed a commotion outside the door of the room he was in. Already outside, we see that the uncle, who was the father of the cattle from before who had just been arrested, had gone to visit the protagonist. Before entering Jiang's room, the old man tells the guards not to allow anyone to enter, regardless of the noise coming from inside. Finally, inside the room, he mentions that it had been a while since they had seen each other. Also, he ended up stomping on the protagonist, saying that he had no idea what trouble he had gotten into, and since he took care of his son by sending him to prison, it was only fair that he should take care of the protagonist now. To play with the finished old man's face, Jiang says that they were very scared. Upon hearing this, the old man went over the edge, saying that he had better withdraw the accusation against his son and invent a lie so that he could be released. But Jiang quickly asks his uncle if he by any chance had hit his head somewhere, since he was crossing the line. When the protagonist takes his finger hostage, the uncle then realized that he was in no position to demand anything at the moment. Apparently, the policeman eventually heard a scream coming from the protagonist's room, and the guards started to find an excuse to justify that scream. However, in the thoughts of one of them, he told himself that it was not good what his boss was doing, since the noises were too loud. Apparently, the excuse the security guards came up with was that they liked to sing loudly while they were hungry, which honestly doesn't make any sense. Turning to Jiang and his uncle, he said he knew full well why he had come to his room, and if he really wanted him to withdraw his accusation about his son, he had better show a little more goodwill. Asking what Jiang wanted, he replied that he only wanted what was rightfully his, that is, all the properties of the Jiang family name. But according to the old man, he could only give the protagonist money. Therefore, since he could not give up the family business, it would be no problem for his son to spend the rest of his life in jail. Besides, he would hire the best lawyers to make sure that his son would spend at least 10 years in jail. After a while, he finally let go of his finger hostage to the finished uncle, and he agreed to pass the properties to him if he would withdraw the complaint made against his son. Leaving the room that he had just experienced great embarrassment, he called his guards to get them to leave. One of them mentions that the policeman wanted to enter the room thanks to the shouting coming from the room earlier, but they prevented them from doing so. This caused the young guard to get a good hiding, since the one who was really shouting was the father of the cattle. In addition, he ordered his security guards to get the property transfer contracts for Jiang to sign. However, apparently this guy was planning something, since he was going to hand over all the bankrupt properties with debts in the millions alone. Back in business, the protagonist thought to himself that he had finally taken what rightfully belonged to them, remembering his father and why he didn't spend as much time with him when he was still a child. We then find out that his father spent a lot of time trying to figure out a way to bring his mother back to them. When young Jiang asked if his mother was in the office, his father replied that she was not, but the office was the key to finding her, not least because his mother had been imprisoned by several bad guys, and he vowed to be able to unlock the room in which she was imprisoned so that he could see her again. Suddenly he notices something coming towards him at high speed, but he manages to dodge it. After this we see some people protesting against him, wanting wages and other things as well. They then start asking the protagonist several questions, trying to get him to say something shameful that could tarnish his image. However, he ends up being pulled into the company, precisely by his divine secretary. He asks what was going on there, and she says that they had been completely deceived. As soon as they took over the company, she asked someone to pass on her data, and with that she discovered that the company was actually sunk in debt, and the problems were leaked to the public. Following this, she also said that several employees had not been paid properly for some years, and his uncle used him and threw all the dirty part to him. Besides the fact that a bunch of employees were angry with him, wanting him to give up his position in the Jung group, she decided to show what was happening live on TV at that moment. Here we see the father of the cattle, who was playing the victim by saying that now the Jung group would be run by his nephew, and other things too, which there is no need for me to mention here. But in the end, he played the poor guy even more, saying that he could only offer a mouth of comfort to the people who were being wronged by the new president of the company. After that, the lady ends up saying that they should get some evidence against the old man at that very moment. But he just told her not to worry, since he was cowardly enough to leave all the dirty work to Jung, showing that the washed-up guy was just a man they didn't need to fear. Besides, even if they were quick, they wouldn't get any evidence against him, and she asks if they should just accept those losses for free. However, Jung replies that he had already made some arrangements for that problem. Not to mention that he would definitely return the favor his uncle gave him 3 times over. After that, the beautiful Miss Secretary accompanied him outside, trying to calm the situation with the crowd. In his thoughts, he was only apologizing for using Miss Maya as a shield, and would have to reward her later. But at a certain moment, he began to sense a red juice and tension in the crowd, and suddenly a guy with a dagger took off on him. While the Divine Secretary worried that her president had been seriously injured, he easily managed to hold the dagger of the assailant, as well as giving him a nice massage so that he could rest for a while. He then asks if there is anyone else who would like to try their luck at hurting him, since they could finish things right there. This caused the protesters to back off momentarily, and since they were apparently law-abiding, Jung proposed a deal. Basically, they would receive double their wages, so everyone who was there should leave their name with Miss Maya, and as soon as everyone was registered, they would receive their wages. This caused them to be surprised by his attitude, believing what he really said. To reinforce this even more, Jung said that he would do everything he promised there, and if he for some reason didn't do what he had promised, anyone who went after him again, he would not fight back. This made the workers' confidence in him increase even more, and they finally began to sign. The princess secretary then asks if they should just let them go, thanks to the whole mess they've made recently. But he replies that they were just innocent people who had been incited by the old man from before. That being the case, he would settle the score with him personally later. In the mansion of the father of cattle and insects, we see him celebrating his father's move. Besides that, they could now use the stolen money to create a new company. Even the rattlesnake from before was enjoying the moment of celebration. But the slag leader says that they can't forget their main objective, and even asks if there is any problem with them using her sister to achieve it. And the Sukiri replies that it was no problem at all. And on top of that, when Jiang went bankrupt, she thought that her sister would definitely divorce him. And finally they could introduce her to the guy from the Liu family. After that, they continued with their momentary celebration, until suddenly the father of the cattle hears the sound of the police car, even though it was late at night. When he gets out to check what was going on, he realizes that the police were again at his residence. Following this, the policewoman from before gave them a voice of arrest, saying that they had a warrant to be able to do this. The dung leader then decided to take the voice and try to talk to the policewoman. He even tries to put on a good face, saying that the previous incident had already been resolved, since the protagonist had withdrawn the complaint about his son. But she already knew this, and she was actually there to arrest the 3 of them this time. He then asks what they had done wrong this time, and she says that the 3 of them were being accused of hiring someone with the purpose of erasing Jiang. With that, they didn't know where to put their faces, since apparently they were being wrongly accused again. But nobody told them to mess with the wrong person. After showing a little resistance, the policewoman even ordered them to cooperate with their investigation, since they were really innocent as they claimed. The cattle's son ended up crossing the line, saying that he knew everything about her and that she had a relationship with Jiang. This caused her to order all the policemen that were there to arrest them by force, since they were refusing to go to jail of their own free will. And finally we see both the insect and the rattlesnake finally being arrested. While the king of dung was being taken to the police station, he asked what the policewoman's name was, swearing that she would pay for it later. But he should worry more about himself, since recently the culprit had confessed that he had hired her to hurt Jiang. Speaking of him, we see him again with his secretary. She mentioned that just as he had ordered, she had sent the security camera video showing the guy who tried to hurt him to the police station. But that evidence alone would not be enough to incriminate his uncle. However, this was just an appetizer for them, since the show had just begun. As she was confused, she asked why he had taken over that company, since she knew it was a big mess. And even if the amount they owed was not a problem, they were just making life even easier for the King of Dung. He agreed, saying that this was indeed so, but he was going to turn this whole mess into a tree of fortune and make them regret it. With this, she finally understood his intention, and discovered that the protagonist was only using the Jiang group as bait, and his goal was just to watch the big fish fall completely because of his greed. At the police station, the young man who tried to hurt the protagonist confessed that the Cattle King had hired him to do it, but apparently the Cattle Supreme didn't even know him. The policewoman then asks if he could remember any evidence that would incriminate the cattle, and it could be anything from bank transfers or even a conversation they had. The young man then answers that yes, he was a contractor who worked for his company, but he didn't pay their wages and told him to go to Jiang Baikan, who was our protagonist. However, when she asked what happened after that, the young man just said he couldn't remember. The old man burst out laughing, since if there was no evidence, there was no reason for all this questioning. Besides, there was no reason for them to believe the accusation of the guy next to them. But within 24 hours, if no new evidence was presented, he would be released. But he would remain in jail in the meantime. This time, already behind bars with the guy he despised, the cattle continued to offend the young worker. The young man then asks the cattle if in their eyes all immigrant workers like him were even worthy of being called human. Disgusted with the guy, the cattle asked him why he had come to him, since he had not even managed to cause Jiang any real trouble. And the young man replied that he just wanted to ask him himself. Not least because he had deliberately not paid their wages and sent all the workers away so that he could use this against Jiang Baikan. The Cattle King then replies that this is exactly what happened, and they were born only to work for them, the upper class people. Upon hearing this, the young man ended up completely disgusted as he realized the true nature of that scum of society, saying that Jiang was actually completely right about him. However, the cattle were gloating, since he would soon be out of there and would not be locked up. But the young man only needed one night, and that would be enough to teach him how many woods a pond could be made from. Besides, he promised Jiang that he would teach the cattle a lesson. And finally he starts on him, giving the finished cattle a good thrashing. Afterwards, we see him completely destroyed, although it could have been worse than that. He talked about how Jiang had already passed over them 3 times, and they could no longer tolerate this being repeated. After this, he orders his son to hire some people to teach our protagonist a lesson. However, his son replies that this was not a good idea, since Jiang was a ruthless person. In addition, if they attacked recklessly, they would probably fall into his trap. When the destroyed old man asks if he would let his father suffer for nothing, he asks the old man to calm down, since he does have a plan. And basically, his plan was to give the divine lady to the son of the Liao family, so that they would take Jiang Baikan exactly there. Therefore, even if the protagonist had some abilities, he would definitely be destroyed when he fought against the Liao family members. Therefore, when the time was right, they would let him see with his own eyes his wife being taken away from him. Not to mention that the Liao family was very powerful. Therefore, even if Jiang remained alive, he would not be able to fight. The Cattle King then asks the Supreme Rattlesnake if she would have the courage to do something like that to her own sister. And she simply answers that she had no fear at all, and that she would even call her sister and have her come to her. By the way, the poison Sukuri really did what it had said, and soon after called his sister, deceiving her about her father's treatment, and was supposed to take her husband at all costs, according to the insect. Now they would just have to wait until Jiang had been beaten enough for them to get back on the road to success again. In young Liao's home, he replies to one of his servants that the photo he was looking at was of the girl he failed to win at school. Basically the reason for his living. However, the girl ended up purposely pulling the photo from his hand, causing the photo to be torn in half. Then the girls began to apologize, asking their master not to be angry, and the girl asked why they were doing all this just because of a torn photo. She even tries to play the victim, saying that she didn't mean to do it and asked him to forgive her. But he asks her which hand she used to tear up the picture of the girl he liked, and after answering, he ends up punishing her. Soon, one of his assistants appeared saying that the Jiang family was there, and they promised that they had taken just what he wanted. However, they had also taken the Divine Lady's husband. Upon hearing this, he was completely disgusted at the audacity of the protagonist having gone to the door of his house, and this was exactly what the young Liao wanted, to be able to get rid once and for all of the guy who stole the woman he loved. However, before leaving, he would ask the young man from Poison Wolf to give him some of his disciples, so that he could teach Jiang Baiken a lesson. After this, the insect couple took our protagonist and his divine maiden to the place where, according to them, the father of the beautiful maiden was to receive proper treatment for his recovery. But when they mentioned the Liao family, he realized that there was something wrong there. The protagonist then remembered a conversation with his uncle, where he asked him if he knew about the pendant he had picked up earlier. He then mentions that it was actually a medicinal jade, and came from the jade mines passed down from generation to generation by the Liao family. And apparently, the clues to the remaining fragments of the Xuan King technique had something to do with the Liao family. When the beautiful lady asks why there is no one inside, the rattlesnake replies that it was because only the two of them had been invited. And suddenly the door closes, leaving the main couple completely trapped inside. After this event, it wasn't long before young Liao showed up with some goons, in an attempt to teach our protagonist a lesson. When Jiang asks who that guy was, she replied that he was a classmate of hers at school. The guy from before started to dream too much, thinking that in high school people said they were the perfect couple, and he quickly goes after our goddess, grabbing her arm and pulling her towards him. But when the protagonist tried to save his damsel, he was stopped by one of the servant's henchmen. As if one of them wasn't enough to get in his way, another one arrived soon after, and here he began to fight against them, so he could go after his divine maiden. We then see the divine lady pleading for help, asking her husband to save her. But every time he tried to get closer, the henchman from before would get in his way. This made him decide to take things a little more seriously, since the two of them had apparently lost their sense of danger. When he finally decided to take things more seriously, it didn't take long for our protagonist to quickly finish them both off. In addition, he told one of them to stop jumping around like a flea, and tell him once and for all how to open that elevator. Since the guy was already seeing a light from the other side of the spirit world, he decided to answer what our protagonist was asking. Basically, only those who possessed the young Liao's identification card could open the elevator. Otherwise, there would be no way to open it. Right after the protagonist heard this, he went to open the elevator with the strength of his own fist. Initially, he had no success, since nothing happened to the glass. The henchman from before then started to say that this was useless, since the material that this elevator was made of was a special material. But a few seconds later, the glass shattered into pieces, opening the passage he needed to be able to save our goddess. Speaking of the beautiful lady, she was about to go through a very complicated and terrifying situation. However, right away the protagonist steals the whole scene, smashing the bedroom door to pieces in order to rescue the divine lady. Wasting no time, he quickly takes on the society's cattle, teaching them a beautiful lesson. When he asks his precious lady if she was hurt, she just responded in tears, saying that she would like to go to their home. And like a good man, he comforted her by telling her that they would soon be going home, as well as wearing his shirt to cover the divine lady. Shortly after, a few more goons decide to show up as well. And as if this wasn't enough, the mummy from before shows up and picks on the angelic lady. She even tries to warn him that the zombie could still move, but when she sees the frightening face the ghost was making, she faints right away. The cattleman then mentions that the punch he had received from the protagonist recently had been quite strong. But they, the Liao family, cultivated a technique that was able to heal their injuries. With that, the protagonist got even more excited, and ended up stepping on his arm, asking if he was able to heal broken bones as well. After that, he actually realized that that technique was part of Xuan King's technique, so parts of it apparently belonged to the Liao family. The cattle then started calling the poison wolf, asking him to go and finish off our protagonist. At this moment we see who is the guy the cattle were calling, and according to him, because he is a professional mercenary, this time Jong could not survive. Next, the scum tells our protagonist that if he purposely injured himself, he might consider letting him live. But from Jong's expression, he clearly wouldn't do anything to himself, since he had the courage to refuse the spoiled boy's request. He ordered Poison Wolf to hurt Jong, and indeed he began to move, throwing some sharp object in some direction. What the young man did not expect, however, was that the object was actually thrown in his direction instead of at our protagonist, finding out the hard way that Poison was not actually on his side. After his embarrassment, he wondered why Poison was no longer on his side. However, it was already clear that the mercenary was actually closer to the protagonist than to the spoiled young man. Young Poison then says that he didn't expect to find the leader of the West in that place, even more pretending to be a little pig, but is actually a tiger in disguise. And he asks if he hadn't recognized Jong, whether he would have finished off his brothers. Upon hearing this, the manure from before began to break into a cold sweat, as he couldn't imagine that even a professional mercenary like Poison would end up submitting to the protagonist. He then replies that if it were someone else, he would do something, but offending the protagonist because of him was not worth it. So, the cooperation they had with the Liao family was being completely ended at that very moment. And finally he and his henchmen withdraw, leaving the protagonist alone with him. The young cattleman then asks who Jong really was, since even a great mercenary did not go against his will. However, the protagonist answers politely, saying that it was none of his business. And since he dared to try to hurt his wife, he was much more interested in the martial arts technique that his family possessed. Therefore, if he handed over the martial technique, he might consider leaving him alive and even calling an ambulance for him. However, it seemed that the young man from before didn't value his life very much, and he didn't agree to hand over his martial skill at first. Jiang decided to leave and let the wounded young man stay there, but since there was no one else in the building, if he didn't go to a hospital soon he would probably not survive. This caused the Cattle Supreme to despair, saying that he would hand over his family's martial art, but he was supposed to call an ambulance, since he didn't want to lose his future children. We continue with the protagonist activating his cultivation skill, as he read the page of the healing skill he had picked up from the young Liao in the past video. Here he discovered that indeed that skill from the Liao family was one of the fragments of the Xuan King technique. However, unfortunately it was still incomplete. With that one piece alone he was already able to cure his uncle's illness and several troublesome diseases as well, and even the internal injuries of his body had been healed by 10%, and was meditating. Suddenly his wife got up, frightened, having had a nightmare about the bad experience recently. Clearly he tried to calm her down afterwards, saying that she didn't need to be afraid, because they were already home. However, with tears in her eyes she wondered why her sister had betrayed her, since she had trusted that rattlesnake so much, and also wondered what she really wanted. MC then reveals that he had already researched the reason for this betrayal, and discovered that she was wanting to use the Divine Lady in order to fulfill the whims of the young Liao, and to finally get the Liao family's new coal project. When the beautiful lady heard this, her pain only increased even more, since just because of a project, her sister had betrayed her and made her go through almost the worst experience in a person's life. But Sigma of Respect once again acted, and said he would be sure to return all the pain and suffering they put his wife through. And since they were after the coal project, he would not let them have it. Next we see that Jiang had gone to talk to young Liao again, and he was asking why he had gone looking for him, since he had already handed over his family's martial art technique, as he had promised earlier. Soon, MC replies that he had come back to make a deal with him. As far as he knew, Poison Wolf always liked to dip his knives and darts in poison, and if he was not wrong, there were still some remnants of poison in his body, so this could have some effects on the roots of his children in the future. That is, if he wasn't cured, of course. Impressed that Jiang knew this, he asks if he really had a way to cure him of these side effects. And the protagonist replies by saying that he would cure him, but in return he would like the new coal project he was developing. And there was one more small thing he needed the young Liao to do for him as well. Without much choice, the young man ended up agreeing to cooperate as quickly as possible with the protagonist, saying that the faster he healed him, the faster he would get the coal project he wanted. Following this, we see that young Jung had gotten exactly what he wanted, and now he owned the coal project that his uncle and his cousin wanted so badly. Clearly his uncle ended up being disgusted with life when he saw that Jung Baiken had not only not been destroyed, but had also gotten the project they so desperately wanted. The dregs of society then said that they didn't know how this had happened. They definitely sent the Divine Lady and the protagonist to the Liao family, but they had no idea what happened afterwards, since they were no longer able to talk to young Liao. Decided to go after him, to try to take what Jung had recently earned. Before long, we see that the scum had come to the protagonist, and soon he asks what a washed-up old man like him was doing there. Speaking of the old man, he asked how Jung had the nerve to make a fool of himself, since he had had his uncle arrested and had sent someone to beat him up. Hearing this, he asks if his uncle had come to him then to settle the score with him, and the old man replies that since he was his nephew, he couldn't let him off the hook. King's goal was actually to get Jung to return the company to him, since he knew about the coal project that he had won. He figured that MC didn't have enough experience to be able to manage the company himself, so it was better that he gave it back to the old man, thus making him the managing director and entitled to all the shares in the company, while the protagonist would get some credit for winning the project and the old man would give him some profits in the future. But just as he finished spouting his drivel, he is hit hard by an egg, and we see his former employees completely disgusted with their former boss, and the old man vowed that he would fire them all when he regained the presidency. However, he ended up being threatened in every way and had to run so that nothing worse would happen to him, since people were tired of being deceived by him. After a while, he finally managed to hide from the pursuers, but he was found by the young Liao's security guards, who wanted to see him immediately. Speaking of him, the young man was enjoying the moment, and told his uncle that he had been wanting to meet him for a while, and asked him to sit down. Then the old slag asked why he had given the new charcoal project to the young protagonist, since the deal was to deliver it to him. The manure from before who got beaten up then replies that he was not the kind of person who broke the promises he made. In addition, he hadn't gotten the person they sent for him, and he also got a pretty good beating from Jung. He got beaten so badly that he gave up and handed the coal project to our protagonist, leaving the old man from before completely amazed by the power that MC currently possessed. Meeting with the slags, his son said that the young Liao's project was great, possibly referring to a new project perhaps, but the money that was needed to get it started was very high, more specifically 500 million. Plus the fact that this project was related to nuclear energy and seemed to be very risky. The old manure man then responds by saying that the money part, they could simply take out a loan with the bank, and if they paid for that project, they could finally easily be the center of attention. In his thoughts, he thought that Jung Baiken's coal project would be completely ruined, since it made no sense to him that coal was better than nuclear energy. The son of the fly then finally agreed with what his father said, since MC had tricked them 3 times. Therefore, it was time to strike back. If possible, he would make Jung Baiken's life turn upside down, so he was going to save some money and take out a loan as well. Speaking of gathering money, he soon went to ask his current wife, telling her to sell the jewelry he had recently bought for her. Some time later, we see a TV commercial where the King of Cattle was announcing his new project, saying that if everything went well, he would be the king of the new energy and fuel industry, in an attempt to convince people to invest in his company. MC just watched the whole show carefully, along with Elder He, and it wasn't long before he asked for the Elder's help again. But he would just have to do as the protagonist said when the time came. A few days later, the young Liao told the old man with the flies that the richest person in town had come to see him, saying that he wanted to withdraw his investment from Jung's project and would like to invest in their nuclear power project. Then he already went to meet the elder, saying that he was honored to have his presence there. But the elder said that a handshake was not necessary, since he did not like to have contact with flies, that is, with people. And he had already read the details of his project. We then see the protagonist behind the scenes, saying everything that the elder should say at that moment. He said that their project was very good, so he was willing to invest $1 billion. However, there was a prerequisite for this to happen, and the cattle uncle said he would do anything, then asked what the elder would like. The MC then asks the elder to say that if they are able to produce 3 times the capacity of a single unit in 3 days, he would make the investment immediately. Clearly this ended up making the other officials doubt, plus this was very dangerous as well. However, the slag old man told young Lio to just shut up, and 3 days would be enough, thus deciding to contact his company right now to get the results that the elder he expected. Indeed, the king of the flies did as he had promised, and contacted one of his employees shortly afterwards, and he soon asked them to increase the energy production by 3 times the current level, and to show them. But she tried to warn him that this would not be possible, because it was too dangerous. Upon hearing this, the old man then asked them to put the investment aside, and that he would withdraw. This made MC's uncle desperate, and immediately ordered her to follow his orders, or else she would quickly lose her job. Therefore, she decided to follow his orders, and ordered the employees there to increase production 3-fold. Shortly after that, one of the employees realized that the nuclear fusion was getting out of control, and as soon as she ordered them to turn everything off, an explosion happened on the site. This made them wonder why this had happened, and the old man thought it was just a glitch in the signal. But the force of the explosion was so great that the glass in the room shattered. When he finally realized what had happened, he started to go into despair, and not only him but his son as well, and the explosion came exactly from their nuclear power production. The old man, disgusted with the dangerous project they had, said that he shouldn't take on a difficult job if he wasn't capable of doing it. So if he didn't have the capacity, he shouldn't make empty promises like he did. Besides hating people like him, who only want profits, and also told him not to even remember that one day the elder was there. Since it was all over, the scum had even forgotten how to stand. He ended up on his knees lamenting that he had lost everything because of his mistake. The TV commercial was now announcing the tragedy that happened in the production of nuclear energy. At this point, we see the Fly family in a small house, falling apart already, borrowing money from all their relatives, but none of them agreed to help them. The traitorous rattlesnake, who only thought about money, said crying that he would not like to live in a place like that, and not even he would like to be there. But since the bank had taken their house and all the valuables they owned, as well as the money, they could do nothing about it. The Fly's son then asks if his father had any success in asking his relatives for money, but it was more than clear that none of them wanted to help. Finally, the poisoned anaconda was good for something, and said that there was one person they hadn't tried to borrow money from yet, and it was just the guy he feared most on earth, our beloved protagonist Jung Baiken. While MC watched the old man give a speech to the police on a national network about the explosion that had recently happened, his secretary said that his uncle had gone with some people wanting to talk to him. Since he was hundreds of millions in debt, he had probably gone to the protagonist in an attempt to borrow some money, and asked if he should send someone to send them away. But Sigma said that he didn't have to do this, since he had been planning it for a long time, waiting for the day that his uncle would ask him for money, determined to finish off their forces personally. As soon as he went to see his uncle, he asked what he had gone there to do, besides that it wouldn't be appropriate if people saw him like that. The scum then said that he had just found out that his daughter-in-law had the audacity to deceive her own older sister, saying that he took her to him only to apologize for what had happened. The protagonist then asks how they plan to fix this. Furthermore, he would not accept a simple verbal apology, so he believed that she deserved to be punished for what she had done. This caused all the flies in the place to become unresponsive after this comment by young Jong, and in the old man's thoughts you could already see that he thought it would be too easy to fool him, but clearly he was wrong. Speaking of him, Jong asks what had happened, and if they hadn't gone there to fix things, unless they were only there to deceive him. Soon the father of the fly orders his son to teach his wife a good lesson. moment she ends up receiving a beautiful slap in the face from her own husband. After that, she asked how he had the courage to hit her for real, since the agreement between them was that he would only pretend to hit her. But the more she talked, the more she was hit, saying that she deserved it all because of the mistakes she had made. Disgusted with him, she called him an unusable bastard, since he had the nerve to beat his own wife just to get borrowed money, and that she was wrong to have married him. Moreover, if she had known the way he would act now, in the past, she should never have broken up with Jung Baiken, and so she would never go through a situation like this. This comment caused him to completely lose his patience and finish the girl off right there, but still leave her alive, of course. Not to mention that he also told her that now that her ex owned a multi-billion-dollar company, he wouldn't even want to have anything to do with her. And we see the fly completely crushed by someone of her own kind, completely knocked out on the ground. When the uncle asks if Jung was satisfied with the punishment she received, he replies that he was no longer angry, so they could leave. However, since the father of the flies refused to leave initially, MC asked if there was anything he still had that he would like to apologize for, but he replied no. In fact, they were facing a lot of financial difficulty recently, so they would like to borrow some money from him. However, Jang mentioned that he remembered 5 years ago when his father was seriously ill, and he had also borrowed money from his uncle. And he asks if his uncle remembered what he had told him exactly 5 years ago when his father passed away. Since the guy had amnesia, he repeated the exact same words his uncle said to him, saying that instead of giving money to a loser like him, it would be better to raise some more dogs. This caused the king of the slags to go completely to their knees before our Sigma of respect, assuming he was wrong and begging for his forgiveness, since if he didn't help them, unfortunately they would be completely finished. Jiang told his uncle that he still had some resentment in his heart, but since he saw that his uncle was very old, he could not leave him in that situation. So, he proposed a new solution. Basically, his uncle would need to learn to bark like a dog and bark at him a few times, so the protagonist would raise him like a real dog. Naturally, he would be willing to pay for the dog he would have, and asks what his uncle thought of this. But for him, Jung Baiken was crossing the line, and I think his pride is too great to do something like that. However, the son of the fly didn't even think twice, and soon began to get down on his knees and bark like a real dog, as our protagonist had asked. Since his brother-in-law barked just right, he was no longer angry with him, so he could go with his secretary to get the money. But that money could only be used by him. So if he found out that the money had been used by his father, he would definitely take it back. And he said he would never let his father touch a penny of that money. When MC's uncle saw his son going alone to talk to the secretary, he ended up offending him, saying that he had taken care of his son for all those years, and yet it was no use. But his son replied that during all that time, they were screaming and being beaten like street rats, and he was tired of all that suffering, besides having spent all those days without a single coin in his pocket. Therefore, if it were not for his father, he would never be in that situation. So he no longer recognized him as his father, and whoever had the money would be his father. That is, the protagonist. Speaking of him, he asked his uncle if he wouldn't learn to bark like a dog, and since this was not going to happen, he should just leave, since he was not welcome in his company. The uncle then says that he even bowed down to him, asking MC not to treat him so badly, and if he would just give him the money, he would just leave on the spot. Since his uncle didn't want to learn to bark, Jiang thought of another way to make his uncle earn a small amount of money, since in the past he collaborated with the Glory Group so that he could betray Jiang's father. He said that if his uncle would tell him who those people were, he could give him the money. But of course he started to disguise it, saying that he could never betray his father, and he didn't know anyone in the Glory Group either. But in his thoughts, we see that it was completely the opposite of what he had said. Not least because a man had warned him in the beginning that if he revealed who he was, something very bad would probably happen to him. As his uncle initially refused to say anything, MC simply decided to leave. However, he soon started to tell everything, saying that he was a guy named Zhu Wenhui, and he was a friend of his father's at school. However, a few years later he simply disappeared and was never seen again. Upon hearing the name of the person who had betrayed his father, anger took over Jiang again, and his uncle was still trying to get the money he had promised earlier. Soon he pulls out a card that had 200,000 in credit, and apparently this still wasn't enough for his uncle. Jiang then said that since his uncle hadn't learned how to bark, and had only given a small piece of information, he was giving enough just for his information. Then his uncle started barking like a dog, just as his son had done earlier. But according to the protagonist, it was now too late for him to do this. Not to mention that he already had a dog, which was his son, so he didn't need to have another one. And now his uncle should leave. This made him completely disgusted with Jiang's attitude, saying that he had even bent down to the level of a dog and learned to bark, but still the only thing he had gotten was a measly 200,000. After this he was charged by the guards, saying that Jiang was making a lot of money, and it wouldn't hurt him to do his old uncle that little favor. Then he ended up receiving a nice pair of handcuffs as a present, and the beautiful policewoman from before appeared, giving him the voice of arrest. The reason was that he was suspected of forcing his staff to operate the power plant in violation of the law, and causing an explosion, which resulted in significant casualties. But he claimed that this was impossible, since he had told the police that they operated the nuclear power plant without his permission. However, the protagonist said that that morning, he saw the elder he showing evidence of his recording to the police, and he was the one responsible for the explosion at the nuclear power plant. Since his uncle had commented on revenge against the protagonist recently, he said that the King of Flies would never succeed, not least because he would spend the rest of his life in prison. A few days later we see the protagonist's main soldier going to deliver a document to his general, and soon he was on his knees in front of him, saying that the investigation into the guy he was looking for had been successfully completed. 5 years ago he received a large sum of money in his account, referring to the person his uncle had said earlier. So he started working with MC's uncle to sell his father, and now he was using the false name of Ma Wenolin, and he was currently in Jiangnan and still in charge of various Glory Group businesses. As he looked more precisely at the evidence and also at the photo of the scum who had betrayed his father in the past, he remembered that this person was the same one who had ordered some goons to give our protagonist a good beating. He was also the one who had ordered them to throw him into the sea to become fish food. After that, he told his soldier to go with him after the celebration banquet for Jiangnan, and he vowed that he would personally end Zhu Wenhui's life and eradicate all the worthless people behind him as well. At this moment we see the Divine Lady receiving a scolding from her mother, where the rattlesnake was telling her daughter to demand that MC pass the shares of the Jiang group to her name. But apparently she didn't want to do that, since he helped her a lot before, and even saved her father's life as well. The poisoned anaconda began to talk nonsense after nonsense, saying that he would cheat on her with the secretary he had. But she said that Zhang and Zhang Maio had no such relationship. Speaking of him, soon he arrived to pick up his wife for the celebration banquet. The aunt who was affiliated with the guy with the fire-breathing trident said that she had some things to discuss with him, and he asked her what she would like. Soon she said what she would like him to do, and her daughter told her not to be so greedy. Clearly he pretended to be surprised by the attitude of his toxic mother-in-law, but let her keep talking nonsense about what he should do with his company. But this time the old woman crossed the line and said that if he didn't want to transfer his shares into his wife's name, he should divorce her immediately. This caused the Divine Lady to finally take action and answer for herself, and she said that she would definitely never divorce him, regardless of whether he had money or not. Therefore, his mother's boa constrictor should stop thinking only about this. This caused him to be relatively surprised by his wife's attitude, because he didn't think she would act that way, even more against her mother. And soon she pulled him out of there, so that they could go to the celebration banquet. According to the poisoned rattlesnake, she was only doing this for the sake of her daughter, and one day she would regret acting this way. He then comments that what her mother said did make sense, since they were married and it was time for him to pass his shares to his wife. But she said she didn't want to, and that she would earn her money on her own. Hearing this, he told her to think of it as a way to help her husband then. so he would like to earnestly ask his dear wife that she could take care of all this and help him from now on. And she, ashamed of his attitude, ended up saying that she would reluctantly accept his offer. At the opening of the celebration banquet, he announced that his wife would now be responsible for managing his company's business. However, a short time later he saw his secretary calling him, saying that the elder he would like to see him, as he said he had something very important to discuss with him. Soon he went to meet the elder, asking what he would like from him. While he was talking to his friend, the divine lady began to look for him, as she was intending to call him for a dance, until finally she saw where he was, and we see that another person was watching her discreetly. Returning to their conversation, the elder said that he really needed his help with something very important this time. That girl was a friend, the daughter of a god of fortune, Feng Kashan, from the Jiangsheng group in Jiangnan City, and her name was Feng Chenchen. She commented that the people who protected her previously could barely survive for long, so she asked them to send someone to protect them. If the protagonist could help them stay safe, her group would reward him with a huge amount of money. When MC noticed the presence of a suspicious being approaching the girl, he ordered his soldier to act immediately. And so he did, protecting the girl from being deleted from history at that moment. Moreover, very easily he managed to get the guy from before deleted. But to his surprise, another one of them ended up taking his wife as a security method, and said that if he wanted his wife to stay alive, he should delete the girl in front of him immediately. Moreover, he would only count to 3, and if he didn't take action, he would bid farewell to his beloved wife. Before the countdown could finish, he took action, and told Miss Feng that this was an emergency, so she was to cooperate with him. She soon asks him what he thought of her request, and he ends up kissing the beautiful lady, saying that he accepts her request. And left everyone there completely surprised, while the bandit was outraged that he had kissed the girl instead of doing what he had asked. The soldier of the protagonist took the opportunity to free the divine lady, and he finally managed to erase the second henchman as well. As soon as he went to check on his wife, he ended up getting a good slap, which honestly surprised me that he wasn't knocked out, since it looked like it was pretty hard. He tells the divine lady that he had to act that way, because there was no other way to distract the bandit in order to save her. He also said that there was nothing between her and him, so he asked her not to be angry. The goddess then decided to leave, and when he asks where she was going, she politely replies to her husband, saying that it was none of his business. When his soldier asked him if he should try to persuade his wife, he replied that it would not be necessary, and he could let her go. But he still asked him to send some people to follow her discreetly. Also, since a big accident had happened at the celebration banquet, someone would have to calm the guests and apologize for the incident. Jiang then asked his soldier to prepare his private jet immediately after the event, and it was time for them to go to Jiangnan to settle the score with the guy who betrayed MC's father. We then have a cut to the airport, and he was asking his soldier how the request to investigate Feng Chenchen, that is the girl who had recently been kissed by him, was going. The soldier then answers that all the attempts to delete the girl were connected with the Glory Group, and they were trying to control the police force in the Jiangnan districts. And another group was also competing with them, called Jinsheng. But the Glory Group was nowhere near this group when it came to business, so they started using techniques like erasing people against their opponents. The protagonist's ambition only increased even more, and he vowed that he would make the scum who betrayed his father become the unusable of Jiangnan, so everyone could step on him. Suddenly they start to hear a big crowd of people, and we see some people preparing the place for a big idol by the looks of it. But at one point while they were preparing the staircases, a crazy fanatic ended up pushing an old man down the stairs, causing the poor guy to fall immediately. The fanboy scum of society with no heart at all told the other beings that I honestly can't even find the words to describe them, to get the old man out of the way, because he was in the way. Man. Get the Lord out of the way. The protagonist quickly appears telling them not to move, and he went to the rescue of the noble lord who had been lying on the stairs for some time. Naja, Rattlesnake Supreme, the girl who deserves to be beaten so badly until Joy is turned inside out, asked if they had stopped talking yet, since her clueless idol was about to arrive there. Disgusting fanboy. The protagonist then answers that that area belonged only to the airport, and asks when it became her by chance for her to get there and take over. In addition, he asked if she was blind in the ears, since she didn't even try to help the man who had been lying on the ground for some time. To complement this even more, he said that they idolized insects and flies that were as disrespectful as they were, since they didn't even respect older people. The bug supremacist then said that he had no right to talk about his idol, and the disgusting fanboys ended up being disgusted with life, agreeing with what the scum had said earlier. They also told him to apologize and take back what he said, but he asked what would happen if he didn't do this, and she ordered one of her flies to go to MC to teach him a lesson. However, the fly could not even withstand a single kick from the protagonist's soldier, and was already thrown far away. According to the cattle dung, this young man was a black belt in the Taekwondo club, and yet he was easily hit. The Supreme Naja started to say that she would call all the fans of the Toxicity Club, so that she could go after the protagonist, as well as posting bad things about him on the internet as well. In saying this, he asks if they weren't afraid of what might happen when their idol found out the way they acted. But the rattlesnake said no, not least because according to her, their idol completely supported the actions of her fans. This made the protagonist decide to take action about it, since they had become such bullies and violent only because of her approval and support. He ordered Zhaoqun, who was his soldier, to contact their partner culture offices and tell them to completely ban the pop star they admired so much, and so his soldier followed his orders. The rattlesnake from before started saying that he was nobody, to think that he was capable of doing anything to harm her idol. But he just ignored all this and went to talk to the master again, who told him to ignore those people, since he could end up having a hard time because of them. But MC told him not to worry, and that soon he would see that what he had said would really happen. Jellyfish eventually received a call on her phone, and quickly her expression changed completely upon hearing that her idol had been banned, and her concert had been completely cancelled there. Plus all her albums had also been deleted from the shelves. Only then did the toxic being who was completely polluting the air in the place where she was, realize that what he had said earlier was true, and not just a mere bluff on his part. She soon pulls herself together and says that idols should not pay for the mistakes of their fans, pleading with the protagonist not to ban her. However, he clearly found her guilty, not least because if she had no skills to control her fans, she had no need to be an idol. Therefore, it was better that she be banned, since that is the best end she could have. She started acting perfectly, pretending to be a poor innocent, thinking she was a poor little girl who had made a mistake. The toxic boa thought she was going to achieve something by playing the poor thing in front of our Sigma, but she just got it completely wrong. Besides, I don't think the protagonist wished any harm to this girl, because her ugly face was already enough punishment for her to have nightmares every day. Seeing that he completely ignored the nastiness, she started blaming her cattle from before, saying that this was all his fault, plus they did something to her that really hadn't happened. This made the cattle from before completely angry, saying that they would call their fellow soldiers to teach the protagonist and his soldier a good lesson. Following this, Jiang had taken the old man to a quieter place, and realized that his pulse was indicating a heart attack. Without delay he asked Zhao to give him some acupuncture needles, and soon he began the treatment of the old man, who quickly woke up after a needle to the forehead. The old man, impressed to have been saved by the protagonist once again, thanked him for his accomplishments, and asked where he had learned such healing skills. But he only said that he had learned a thing or two about Chinese medicine, so he was not out of danger yet. Just as he was about to apply a few more needles to improve the gentleman's condition, a girl suddenly appeared, telling the protagonist to stop exactly where he was. Moreover, she asked how he had the nerve to deceive her grandfather, saying that he would call the police on Jiang. But the old man soon said that she had misunderstood, and that young man had actually saved her life twice. So she was supposed to apologize to the protagonist for the rude way she acted earlier, but she refused to apologize to a fraud who sold fake medicine. This made the old man indignant at his granddaughter's attitude, but MC told him not to worry about it, since they really had to get out of there soon anyway. The girl then commented that he was too smart for a mere fraud, and told him to get the hell out of there. And this caused the old man to have another heart attack because of his stress. Then we see that the protagonist was on his way to Feng Chenchen's house, and the soldier commented that his soldiers were stationed in the suburb, waiting to meet them and the Feng group for the protection mission. But what they didn't expect was that their car would be quickly cornered by some Taekwondo black belt. And we see the little boy from before, the fanboy who was thrown away with just one kick, showing his veteran who it was that had beaten him up. According to his superior, he would teach a lesson to the people who had done this to his student. And soon the scum from before started teasing the protagonist, calling him a heroic young man who had done the right thing, then asking if he was so brave now to get out of the car, since all his brothers in the fight were there. When Zhang heard this, he said that if they hurried and ran away from there immediately, it might not be too late for them. But the young man doubted this and asked what he meant by this, besides that he was talking a lot of nonsense because he was afraid. But it wasn't long before the army trucks arrived next, completely shutting down the black belt cars. One of the soldiers ended up commenting that they were very brave, and another asked how they dared to attack someone in the army. So he asked them to show how good they were first. And since they wanted to fight so badly, the soldiers asked if they could accompany them in this fight, causing them to go into complete despair right away. After the army arrived in order to help their general, they ended up teaching the Taekwondo guys a lesson, and even said that the youngsters were not even strong enough for them to at least warm up. However, apparently this was about to change, and we see that when their young master finally decided to get out of the vehicle to help his companions, this made the slags hopeful that they would now win that fight. This master actually had a natural talent for martial arts, and he quickly began to fight against the guys in the army. The protagonist, seeing a boy so young, yet so skilled in the cultivation arts, was impressed, not least because this was rare to see. Meanwhile, the young man continued to teach the army guys a lesson, thinking that they were not even capable of withstanding a single attack from him. Even the slags were completely thrilled to see this scene, but this happiness was soon to end. Then the young master said what he would do with our general's soldiers. We see that they were about to have a hard time. As soon as he started the attack to be able to finish one of the soldiers, the protagonist appears, stealing the scene, and asks if he possessed the internal force. Not least because he knew a little about it, so there was no way he could hide something like that. But much to the martial arts master's chagrin, with just a slap across the face, the protagonist was able to finish him off, causing him to be thrown away like nothing. This left the cattle and slags from before surprised at the strength Zhang possessed, and he ordered his soldiers to stand up, not least because he had not allowed them to play dead. The general ended up revealing that he had told his soldiers that they could not use the internal energy, which was the ability the young master possessed, on ordinary people. But since the master was no ordinary person, they were allowed to do whatever they wanted. Apparently they were just waiting for the general to say this so they could actually use their internal energy. And one of them ended up commenting that if they didn't use this energy after practicing it, they would get very angry. After this, they went to see the young master, since he had recently said that he was going to do some not so good things with the soldiers, and he quickly started to ask for forgiveness. He didn't want to be completely deleted from history, but there was nowhere to run, and he finally received the reward for his recent actions. At this point we get a cut to the Feng family mansion, and we see that Zhang and his soldiers had gone there. He then apologizes for the delay, saying that they had run into something on the way. After that, he was introduced to the father of the beautiful young lady who received a kiss earlier. The girl's father was happy to meet the man who had saved her a short time ago, and was in awe of the protagonist's abilities, even though he was still so young. Initially, we see that the family guards were not at all happy with the protagonist and his soldiers to protect them, and they also said that they were nothing more than muscle, and the guys who wanted to delete the girl were pros at deleting people from history. According to the guards, only the highest ranking in the Martial Arts Alliance Martial Arts Association had enough ability to take that job. So we see that this guy, Wang Shuai, had a crush on the big shot's daughter and said that those soldiers were not ready to protect her, so it was better that he protect her personally. The young lady then apologizes to the protagonist for the mean comments of the guys from before. And since her father had offered a percentage of the company as payment, they probably didn't want the protagonist to get a share as well, so they were being rude to him. In addition, the miss also said that she would make sure that she didn't let MC's visit there go completely to waste. Soon she made an announcement for everyone there to hear loud and clear, saying that it was the protagonist and his private soldier who had saved her from the bad guys earlier. As such, she firmly believed that they were indeed capable of protecting her. This made my suspicions about this guy from before even more confirmed afterwards, since he was disgusted with Jiang for kissing the young lady in front of everyone. But soon she tried to explain herself by saying that the protagonist didn't have much choice but to do that, since it was a delicate and emergency situation. The girl's father, upon hearing this, said that he was completely grateful to MC for saving his daughter. However, this time the people he would be dealing with would not be like the ones he had met before. That being the case, they were afraid that he wouldn't be able to handle it. And just as he was about to say that it would be better if Jiang didn't protect them, the girl tried to convince her father that they were really strong for the job. The rejected cattle from before gave the elder Feng an idea, telling him to let the protagonist fight with him. And if he lost, he and all his soldiers were to leave immediately. And if for some reason Jiang rejected the fight, he was to get down on his knees before all of them and hit himself in the face as punishment 50 times. And after he hit himself, he was to pick up all the soldiers and leave immediately. The young lady, already irritated with the situation, said she didn't need that scum meddling in her private affairs. But he said that this problem was between men, so she should not get involved, unless Jiang admitted that he himself was not a man. Mr. Feng said that he was afraid that he might really hurt the protagonist, since he had cultivated the internal energy. However, the cattle said that out of respect for Lord Feng, he would let the protagonist go, but only if he admitted that he was not capable of doing the job. But since MC doesn't run away from a nice challenge, he accepted Shuai's offer to fight him. This left the beautiful young lady and her father surprised that Jiang had accepted the challenge, since Shuai was #1 in the Martial Arts Association, and ordinary people would not be able to beat a person who cultivated internal energy. But Jiang said that the conditions Shuai had imposed on him and his soldiers would also serve his opponent. Therefore, if Jiang won the fight, the scum would get their dogs and leave quickly. Believing that he would win anyway, Shuai accepted the challenge, but told him to stop dreaming, since there was no way he could lose to someone like Jiang. Since there was nothing more the elder could do about it, he simply let them fight among themselves, but mentioned that it was better that they went to the back of the house so they could start the fight. When they were facing each other, the protagonist said that the cattle from before had better go with everything he had, and apparently he prepared to go with everything. But from the look on the protagonist's face, he was just bored seeing all that show without any need. In Shuai's thoughts, he was going to finish off the protagonist in front of everyone there, and humiliate him completely. But to the scum's chagrin, just as he went up to the protagonist, delivering his most powerful blow, Jiang stopped him with just one of his hands, leaving everyone there surprised at the general's abilities, since that blow from before should have been able to finish him off easily. MC then said that the young man's technique was very powerful indeed. However, what was powerful about it was useless. Besides, now it was his turn to return the favor from before, and he prepared to finish off the young scum of society. But unfortunately, with just one punch, the little boy was thrown far away, as if he were the lightest thing in the world. This made the beautiful young lady from before think that Jiang was definitely able to protect her. The other members of the Martial Arts Association commented among themselves that Shuai was the best among them, yet he was still defeated so easily. After this, the protagonist asked if this was proof enough that he was the best suited for the job, and one of the members of the Martial Arts Association said that they would withdraw from that job because they were not able to fulfill what was really required. Since the association had lost, all that was left was the Martial Arts Alliance, and they thought they were more powerful than the association itself. They were sure that once their master arrived, he would teach the protagonist a lesson, and according to them, their master was not as weak as Shuai. Soon after they had told him about his master, he arrived, but with one of his arms injured. And for a change, it was precisely the promising young man from before, who had lost to Jiang with just one blow. But apparently he was not there to play around, and mentioned that his students had told him that someone was trying to steal his job of protecting the beautiful lady. One of the young men in the alliance started pointing at the guy who was trying to steal their work. But when he saw who the guy was who wanted to take the work, I think he changed his mind completely. One of his students told the master to teach Jiang a good lesson, and for him to teach them why flowers are red. But it was his student who got caught next, and he said he would show him why the flowers were red first. Afterwards, the young master apologized to Jiang on behalf of his students, and said that they were probably blind. This was because they could not see their greatness compared to everyone else there. Moreover, only Jiang and his soldiers were capable of this job, and there was no way he and his students could even compare to them. Since he would have no chance at all to fight the protagonist, he quickly decided to retreat with his henchmen. Shocked by it all, some people still couldn't believe that not even the Alliance dared to go against MC. So, since Jiang had now proven herself more than suitable for the job, she believed that no one else there had anything against it. Not to mention that her father would still give a percentage of their company to Jiang when the job was completed. But unfortunately there always has to be some scum to get in the way, and some flies started to have their say, saying that even if he was able to protect them, giving him part of the company would be too much. These and other comments too made the beautiful lady almost say something very ugly to be said. As the elder was tired of those comments, he said that was enough. Not to mention that what got them to where they are today was precisely trust, not judging people based on what they did. So if he promised 10% of his shares, as soon as Jiang completed the job, he would give the 10% he had promised. He then asked if his life and the lives of everyone there were not worth it. He also added that the amount of the payment was final, and there was no reason for any further negotiations. The old man then entrusted Jiang and his soldiers with the safety of everyone there. And since Lord Feng trusted the protagonist so much, he swore that he would make sure that everyone there was safe. One of the soldiers then commented to Commander Zhao, saying that that percentage was nothing compared to what they already had the Western Territory. And he asked why they were going through that humiliation, and why the general had to accept that commission to protect the old men. After hearing this, Commander Zhao then said that this commission was only circumstantial, and the general wanted to use this as an excuse to deal with his enemy, Zhu Wenhui of the Glory Group. And after hearing their commander's explanation, they were excited again to be able to fight the guys who were after the beautiful lady. Zhao then told his soldiers to be quiet, and not to cause any more unnecessary trouble for the general. The protagonist then asked why they were standing still, and also asked if they had become rusty after a few years of standing still without practicing. And quickly they began to prepare, together with Commander Zhao, to protect their customers. When Zhao saw that the protagonist's wife was still not answering his calls, he asked if everything was really okay. Jiang replied that his theory was right, and he would probably only be able to really calm her down later. Therefore, it was for Zhao to find out the whereabouts of his wife and to tell him as soon as he found out. Speaking of his wife, we see the divine lady who had been disgusted with the protagonist, sad this time. According to her, in the last few days Jiang had made dozens of calls to her, and since she didn't answer, he stopped doing so. After that she began to think she had no significance in his heart, and was nothing more than his wife by name only. Fine lady, we see that some important people were going to start a meeting very soon, and the beautiful lady was going to attend that as well. Originally she had gone to Jiangnan just to meet her schoolmates and talk to them about old times, but she had never imagined that she would be forced to work as vice president. We then see a likely scene from the past, where she ended up meeting with a friend from high high school, who said she had a favor to ask of her. The favor was for the divine lady to help her husband's company, since she had heard that she ran her family's business very well, and her husband would give the position of vice president to the divine lady. The comments of the employees there were not the most pleasant. Besides, there was a rumor going around in the company that the divine lady stole the red-headed girl's chance to become vice president of the company. And even though the beautiful lady was hearing everything, they refused to keep it down, just to provoke her even more. Back in the meeting room, we see the head of the site saying that they needed to make sure that one of their products was listed on the first page of a famous website, which would make them raise a good amount of money. So what they needed to do now was to find a way to get their new product, the air vest, on the first page of the site. But from the expression of the people there, this would not be a very easy task. Some employees then mentioned that they had already tried everything, but had not yet been able to get in touch with the people responsible for the site. And another employee suggested that they put their product on a third-rate website instead. But the boss said that he hired them precisely because he was hoping that they would be able to make their brand one of the best brands in the country. Although it was a bit difficult to achieve this, he still believed that if they worked hard, they could certainly achieve success. Then the divine lady proposed that he not advertise their product on the front page, as she was afraid that customers would not be convinced to buy such a luxurious product. This caused the boss to ask why she was so ignorant, and explained that this was the same air vest that another famous company had, so it made no sense for people not to buy their product. The differential was actually that it was much cheaper than their rival companies, so all they had to do was to get their product on the first page of that famous website. After hearing the determination of the head of the company and seeing that he would not give in easily, she then asked what the profit margin would be that they would give to the company that owns the site. But he said it would be the usual standard average. From the reaction of the employees, you could see that this was going to be very bad, since they would not accept to put their product on the site unless the commission was high. When he saw that his employees were whispering about it, he did not like this at all, and told them to tell everyone what they were really thinking. The red-headed woman, who seemed to be quite toxic, said that the boss was right, and that this could actually be a good thing, if executed by the person with good enough skills to finish the job. After this, he asked her who she thought was capable enough to do this job, and she mentioned that the ideal person would certainly be the current vice president of the company, as his wife had mentioned that the beautiful lady managed the famous lingerie brand. She seemed to be very capable for the job. Therefore, it was feasible that they would leave that highly important job just for the lady to handle. On a side note, something tells me that this woman is worthless. The officials eventually agreed with the rattlesnake earlier about the divine lady being in charge of the service. Still, the beautiful lady tried to talk about this important decision, but the president apparently didn't care about excuses and asked if she wasn't as competent as everyone said she was. In addition, the poison Sukiri asked if she was the kind of person who made money only by the connections she had, rather than having real potential for it really. As this still wasn't enough, the unloved jellyfish provoked the divine lady even more, with phrases that had no need to be said. But she told the rattlesnake that she didn't need to listen to her provocations, and that she would be in charge of that project in collaboration with the company they wanted to partner up with. The next day, she naturally went to the headquarters of the company they wanted to partner with, and introduced herself as the product supervisor of a secret brand. When she made an appointment to talk to them, she was told that she could talk to their boss that same day in the morning. The attendant said that their boss hadn't arrived yet, and she just said she would wait for him. After that, one of the attendants asked if she was really going to wait there, and the blonde just told her to let her wait, since their boss wouldn't be there anyway. A few hours had passed, and it was time for the employees' lunch. And speaking of lunch, the divine lady had made a request earlier so that she could have her meal, and we see that the girls were disgusted with her. This is because the beautiful lady had been there for a long time, and even ordered food via delivery so that she wouldn't have to leave until she talked to the girl's boss. Realizing that the girls were up to something, the beautiful lady said that she had made extra requests when ordering food, and offered her leftover portion to the girls so that they could eat. The girls were to see this as a gift from the young lady, and they accepted with respect, as she had said. Soon after this generous act on her part, she won the girls over, and they finally decided to call their boss, named Guan. It was not nice to keep her waiting, since she was a good person. As soon as they called his boss, he asked what he could do for his dear employees, but from his other face, you can already see that this guy is going to cause some problems yet. When the girls told him about the girl who was waiting, trying to talk to him, he asked them to let her come up, since they were the ones who had asked him. But as soon as they hung up the phone, you could tell that he didn't even want to talk to anyone from the secondary company, which is the company that the divine lady was representing. He couldn't believe that the girl was even able to convince the receptionists to contact him. But still, he just told himself that he would find a good excuse to refuse the partnership. As soon as the divine lady enters the boss's office, he asked her what she would like quickly, since she didn't have much time left. Soon she began to say what she would like about their partnership and things related to that as well. Clearly looking at such a beautiful young woman, he ended up being enchanted by the beauty of the divine lady in front of him, thinking that it was very rare to find a like her. This guy's intentions were not the best, and he came up with a plan to get the beautiful lady. He said that he didn't want to hear about those things there, and she began to think that he wouldn't give her a chance to talk about the proposal she had with him. But he then said that he heard that she had waited a long time, so they could just go to a restaurant and she could take her time explaining her business plan. And she accepted. By now they were both at the restaurant, and she offered him the project file to take a closer look. However, he ignored everything she said earlier, and asked how she could start working like this without first having at least one drink. But she refused gently, saying that she was not good at drinking. He gave the excuse that she could learn to drink if she didn't know, and he would personally teach her to do so. But she still insisted on refusing, saying that she was only there to talk about working with him, and really didn't want to drink anything that had alcohol in it. Tired of hearing her excuses, he forced her to drink the glass of wine he had with him, saying that it was exactly this denial from her that made her unserviceable, being made the divine lady drink the entire glass of wine. The sigma of respect appeared in the background. Without a second thought, he grabbed the scum of society, picked up a nice plate of noodles, and made the unworthy being from before forcefully eat that meal. In the divine lady's thoughts, she thought he had gone to find her. After all, she thought he even cared about her anymore. But she was still in doubt as to how he knew she would be there. Then he threw the scum away, disposing of a being that would be of no use to him for the time being. After this, he started to argue with the beautiful lady, asking how she dared to go out drinking with someone, if she even had a person to accompany her in this, since she was too weak for drinks. But she asked how he knew she was there, and if he was following her. But before he could explain anything to her, let's have a glimpse into the past now of what happened until he actually met with her. Since he had been hired to protect the young Miss Feng, they had found all the spies that were in the family, passing information to the guys who wanted to delete them from history. Then we see an official saying that a group from the military was there looking for Jiang Baiken, and we see that this seemed to be a very important person by the looks of it. As soon as they spot each other, we see that they have actually been good friends this whole time. The guy from the military said he was worried that the protagonist didn't have enough people to help him with his goals, so he brought some people along in case he needed more help. But since this was a personal matter, he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But he didn't imagine that the young man next to him would be on alert as well. And after this, they decided to go out for a drink, and the general's friend recommended a restaurant where they could go for a bite to eat. And this is how the protagonist managed to meet the divine lady, and as they were passing by, Jiang heard a familiar voice and stopped there to take a closer look at who it was, thus meeting his beloved wife at last. The human scum then asked who they were, why they had dared to cause trouble for the restaurant. But MC said that she was his wife, and he would not allow anyone to force her to drink wine. But according to the buck, not even he being her husband gave him permission to cause trouble in the restaurant they were in, and he gave the excuse that they were just socializing at work. But this ended up making Jung even more disgusted with this fly scum, and the situation only got worse when the scum said that they had nothing to do with that matter. Then Jung said that he was a civilized person too, so he would not be violent with him, and would make the young fly have a great time, and he began to drag him into a room with more privacy, while the divine lady asked where he was taking the manure. However, the door was closed right in her face, not allowing her to move forward to see what would happen next. As soon as they entered the room, Baiken threw the insect on the floor, like the disposable being that it really is. Now the scum began to worry about what was about to happen to him, and asked what the protagonist was intending to do with him. However, the MC ordered the waitress to take all the red wines and bottles of other drinks she had in the hotel, and would make the gentleman in front of her have all the socializing he could handle. After this, he borrowed all the staff from Old Man Lin, who was the protagonist's friend that he had just met again. But Old Lin said that was his job, and ordered his soldiers to hold the rest of the insects for him. Thinking that his business position would change something, he started saying that he owned a famous company, and they couldn't do this to him. But that was just what he thought. We quickly see them put a kind of funnel in place so that the young man could appreciate socialization in the best way possible. And soon after this, the protagonist started to help the young man to socialize, since this is what he was doing with his dear wife. But the joke went a bit far, and even MC's friend joined in, further helping the young insect out of orbit. After teaching him a lesson, Jung said that all the drinks used would be paid for by him, and the protagonist's friend was upset that the whole thing was already over. Then since there were no drinks, it seemed to me that he was making the dung eat wasabi, which is quite fiery by the way. After that, he simply picked up his divine lady, put her on his shoulders, and decided to leave the place so they could go away. And Lin told everyone to be quiet, since when couples argued, they resolved their differences in the best possible way, which, by the way, I can't talk about here. The story continues with Jung carrying his beloved wife on his shoulders, having gotten her out of a great deal of trouble. But still, she was saying that if he didn't let her go, she would divorce him. And after putting her down, he ended up giving her a hard time, saying that first she disappeared and didn't answer any of his calls, and then she shows up drinking wine with a completely unknown guy. And after they finally meet, the first thing out of her mouth is that she wants a divorce. This really made her end up making him angry with her. But her only response was that nobody told him to kiss anyone else, since he was her husband. While she had her hands on his face, she remarks that she hadn't even kissed him yet, and someone else came and did it before her. And for ultimate glory, she finally kissed MC. The others who were with them were just watching from the sidelines, still eating a snack, until MC's friend comments that women in the old days were like normal women, but today's women are really like wolves and tigers. On the way home, the general's friend commented that there was something he still didn't understand, and Jung told him to speak what was in his thoughts. He also said that he already knew that he had not come to him simply so that they could have lunch. According to him, all the top authorities already have information that Jung was in Jungnan, and several powerful families also received news about him. Moreover, they all asked MC's friend to introduce them to him, and he was wondering if Jung would be willing to accept this humble invitation. In response, he said that he didn't really like all this business about fame and fortune. The friend then says that it was they who invited Jung to their home, and it was no problem to go there to at least meet them. According to him, the Feng family is one of the strongest families in Jiangnan, and in order to welcome the protagonist, they have reserved a restaurant for this. After all this, Jung eventually accepted his friend's invitation, saying that he would make an exception this time. But this would not be repeated, and apparently the meeting at the restaurant would be the following day in the afternoon. After that we get a cut to a completely different scene, where I don't need to describe what might be going on, until the protagonist and his commander arrive to be able to disturb them. but apparently they completely ignore what they saw before, and simply turn their backs to a situation like that. The stressed young man then told them not to tell anyone about what they saw there, or something very bad might happen to them. But since the guy was too small, apparently Jiang and the commander couldn't see anyone there, already making the guy from before even more irritated by this attitude of theirs. And to make matters worse, we see the rattlesnake that pushed the gentleman off the ladder earlier, and it turns out that this guy was the idol they were waiting for at the airport. To make matters worse, the Black Widow Sukuri made up a story saying that Jiang had done something that never even had a chance to happen, and this made the little idol decide to punish our protagonist. It didn't take long for him to call out the guards so that they could teach the youth a lesson, and he even told the guards to take Jiang's hands away as punishment as well. The protagonist then asks if the scum of society knew the punishment for the offense of intentionally causing harm to a person. But according to him, the laws applied only to ordinary people, and not to him. Furthermore, we found out that the young man was from the Feng family, mentioned earlier by the protagonist's friend. And according to him, his family invited a great army general with great power. And finally, he gave the final order for them to attack the protagonist. As the guys attacked, Jiang simply told his commander Zhao to deal with them, but to take it easy too. And he quickly followed his general's orders, but they didn't seem to have much fun for long, as he easily finished them all off. This left the cattle from before with their rattlesnake surprised, and soon after he was begging Zhao not to hit him, also begging him to become his bodyguard, and would give him double the price that Jiang was paying him. But he simply said that he was grateful for the invitation. But as he hadn't said anything else, the guy, who was already getting all upset, then asked if he accepted his proposal. But from Zhao's reaction, you could already see that he certainly did not. And finally he started to beat him as if there was no tomorrow, teaching him a lesson that, by the way, he will never forget in his life. And apparently, he learned his lesson, and also, never to mess with anyone he didn't know again. After that, we have a cut to the restaurant scene, where director Lin, who was Jiang's friend, had gone to the restaurant where the meeting had been arranged with the Feng family. The scum parents from before politely asked where the general was, who was not with him. In response, Lin said that he had to go back for a while because a matter had suddenly come up. However, his old boss had already arrived on the scene, and asked if they hadn't met him yet. But apparently none of them saw him arrive. Suddenly the security guard appeared saying that the cattle manure had been beaten by someone. As the disposable being was being carried outside, he told Mom what had happened to him. And even though the rattlesnake knew about her son's atrocities, she still said that she would send some people so that she could erase the guys who did this to him. And a detail aside, the bald girl in the background is the anaconda that pushed the gentleman off the stairs. As punishment to her, they cut the boa constrictor's hair. Toxic Medusa then told the security guards to go after the guys who did this to her son. To her and the toast puppy's chagrin, the father of the family told them not to act in any way, not least because the priority that day was to receive their VIP guests. As such, anything else would not matter at all, and as long as the Feng family could manage a good friendship with the leader, it would be very easy to find someone to take revenge for them. When the father of the family returned to meet Lin, he asked if he had contacted the protagonist yet, and asked where he was as well, saying that they would send someone to pick him up. But apparently there was no need to send someone to get him, since he was on the phone with Jiang just now, and found out that he had actually already left. Surprised by this, the father of the family asked why he had already left, and apparently his son had a lot of courage. then saying that he had the courage to threaten Jiang by saying that he was going to do some pretty bad things to the VIP. And only then did the scum's father realize that in fact, the person his son had mentioned before was precisely the VIP guest they had been waiting for all this time. Lin only confirmed the suspicion of the head of the family, and said that he had worked hard to get him to meet Jiang there, but his people couldn't even recognize the protagonists. Not only had they treated him with punches and kicks, but they had deeply offended the general, so he was supposed to take care of it himself. Finally, Lin decided to finally leave, and as he was leaving, the father of the scum simply stayed on his knees, as he didn't know what else they would do from now on. Rattlesnake then asked why Director Lin was leaving so soon, and she asked this of her husband, since she got no answers from the principal. But leaving that aside, she asked if he had met with the Lord, and that his son was still waiting for him to help him in his revenge. This made the father of the family completely beside himself and slapped the poison snake that was his wife, saying that he was going to take revenge on her mother. Trembling completely, the rattlesnake asked why her husband hit her, and he answered her in the way she deserved, saying that her son had offended the very person they were expecting, and he had enough power to cause their family to be completely destroyed. While the rattlesnake remained unresponsive, he thought about what he could do about the situation, and he thought of the president of the Glory Group, who had made another donation of 500,000 yuan to the Welfare Institute in his own name. He thought that he should meet with the president in order to get his help, and find a solution to this problem. Speaking of the president of the Glory Group, we see him playing with some children, until suddenly his secretary said that he had a problem that had come up. As soon as he was alone with her, he asked what it was that had happened, and she said that all the people who were sent to erase the Feng family had been captured. She also says that the shareholders found a special military force, and they were protecting all the shareholders in an ironclad tank, and they were immune to attacks from swords and firearms. As soon as she hands over the photo they had been able to take of the head of that army, we find out that it was precisely Jiang, who had been thrown into the sea by him a few years ago. Upon finding out that the young man's ghost had returned as a superior being, he apparently already began to sound cold, perhaps afraid of what might happen to him in the future. According to Zhu, it was time for the monsters of the Martial Alliance to do something. However, his assistant said that they were too arrogant, and he was afraid that they wouldn't follow his orders. In response, he asked her to play dirty with them if necessary, and so she followed her superior's orders. Arriving at the location they were at, we see that it was just the guy who got his ass kicked by MC earlier. She said that her boss had just bought an uninhabited island, and would like them to examine the place for dangerous creatures, and in return, they would receive a generous reward, also asking if he would like to accompany her there. The other members of the alliance were very excited to go there by the way, and the girl said that they could even get beautiful women so that they could play volleyball with them. And even their leader gave in and accepted the young girl's request in front of him, excited about what was to come on this island. After that, she went to talk to the leader of the Martial Alliance, saying that she had an important request for them, and she hoped that they could accept this request. Basically, she wanted them to help delete the protagonist from the story. But the elders said that the rules were clear, and anything that involved taking the lives of innocent people would not be done by them. Even the strongest person there apparently said the same thing as the others too, and she had better find someone else for the job. Until she decided to play dirty with the old man, saying that his rules were more important than the lives of his young disciples. Clearly this caught their attention, thinking that her disciples were in danger or something, and they asked what she had done with them. But she didn't answer, and simply told them to think about her proposal, saying that she was expecting an answer from them by the next day. As soon as she left, the elders were left wondering what might happen to the young people if they simply did nothing. until the leader there said that he would delete the protagonist from the story. As he left to go meet MC, his companions said they understood why he was worried about his grandson, but it still went completely against their principles. But from now on, he withdrew from the martial arts alliance, and everything he did from now on would have no bearing on the alliance. Already on the island before, we see a girl playing volleyball. And as soon as she throws the ball towards the boys, we see that they were actually letting the balls hit them on purpose. And that's certainly how they got that picture where their faces were swollen. Until he realized that something bad would probably happen soon, as dark clouds were forming, and a huge feeling of anxiety was growing in his heart. And in case you haven't understood